Disobedient Media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network, here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, Providence, Rhode Island, in the heart of the city we love. The Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. We're going to tell a few tonight. They're going to span the national as well as the local. We'll talk about sports, we'll talk about politics, we'll talk about everything that matters. CoalitionRadio.us, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Please follow us at Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, and follow us at Coalition_radio, as well as our all apolitical, anti-billionaire baseball boys club, What Fenway Dream, at Pawtucket is Home baseball feed, where we'll continue to cover the ongoing developments in your Pawtucket Red Sox. Or, as we'll find out later tonight, the Woo Sox? Yikes. Joining me for the first time is someone whose coverage of all things Worcester I've come to enjoy over the last couple of weeks. One of his articles was shared, and I've reshared it as part of the show promotion, covering really an analysis of the Worcester business scene and how it might impact the ongoing developments with the potential relocation of the Pawtucket/Woo Sox. His name is Grant Welker, and he is the news editor of a publication called the Worcester Business Journal. He joined them in February 2017. He is a veteran reporter, and while some of his work may be digital, his hands are still ink-stained, as we like to say. He's worked everything from the Hartford Courant, the Herald News, and here locally in the Reeve. He's a graduate of the University of Connecticut and earned a lot of stripes locally for his coverage of the ongoing drama involving, and it seems like it was just a few years ago, all right, the market basket phenomenon, and in fact co-authored a book called We Are a Market Basket. That's something we're going to discuss tonight, as well as get really a look at what's happening to our neighbor to the north in Worcester, Massachusetts. Now, much of it is made, of course, of the ongoing drama regarding the AAA baseball team and the back and forth potentially as two cities, reputations, business climates, hospitality, tax breaks, are leveraged in an attempt by the baseball owners to find the best home for them. But it came to my attention after speaking to a number of folks that there's a lot of misinformation, urban legends, confusion, sometimes studied ignorance by our political leaders, of really the two faces, if you will, of Providence and Worcester. They're two cities that are certainly central to the fortunes of New England. Providence, while it may be the capital city of the city-state we know and love as Rhode Island, is in a lot of ways very similar to Worcester, Massachusetts. They're both gritty industrial towns located in central Massachusetts. They both faced economic challenges over the years. They both attempted through a variety of means to pull themselves up by their bootstraps economically. There's also an attempt by our political leaders to try and create this artificial boundary when they talk about the Rhode Island economy and the Massachusetts economy. Both tonight and on a going forward basis, I'd like to continue to touch base with Mr. Welker in Worcester, because there's really no such thing as a Rhode Island economy or a Worcester economy. Economies don't respect borders. They don't respect individual industries. They're sort of an amorphous set of circumstances, environments, conditions that businesses and individuals operate in. And there's a lot to be said that if in fact New England is to overcome, particularly central New England, is to overcome the financial challenges of their, I'll just say, re-emerging from their roots as manufacturing towns into the new global economy, that in fact we can't be pitted against each other. We must work cooperatively and understand the issues that a Fall River, a Providence, a Worcester, a New Bedford, a Chicopee, a Springfield, a Lawrence, all face. And we certainly can't act in competition with each other. So it was that in spirit that I invited Mr. Welker to join us. And first of all, thank you on such short notice. And of course, welcome to the Coalition for the very first time.
Sure, absolutely. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's set the backdrop, because as I mentioned off air, the focus tonight is not to be all Paw Sox all the time. We'll touch on that later. But I really want to gain an understanding of Worcester as a community. First of all, you come from a strong reporting background. So God bless you. There's certainly a shortage of that these days. So you emerged as really a feet on the street reporter, didn't you, from the University of Connecticut, I believe?
I did, and I've been doing the Gateway City tour. It seems going from Fall River to Lowell to Worcester, and in that time, I've covered enough other things tangentially in New Bedford or a bit in Providence, Lawrence. Um, so yeah, as you were saying before, these cities really do have so much in common. I think they're a little bit just at different phases of their rebounds,
Hmm.
essentially, for kind of moving from the old manufacturing days generations ago to what they want to be in the future. Providence has done a great job. And in some ways, I think it's funny you see Worcester really does want to become more like Providence, like what they've done with the river is revitalizing that area and building off of Brown and RISD and URI and Roger Williams and others, Providence College. So they really do take a lot of lessons from each other, and they really are very intertwined with each other.
Hmm. So, what is the state of Worcester today? I mean, it's again every if you listen to every city in New England, in fact, every city across America, whether it be as a result of the Amazon tour or these recurring issues with professional sports team, each city is going through its own self-described, self-appointed renaissance. Um, Worcester is a college town. You've got the College of the Holy Cross. We both had the opportunity to interview Victor Matheson, as an aside. You've got a wide range of great schools: Worcester Polytech, Assumption College, as well as nearby state schools. So it's certainly a college town. But what else is going on? What's if you were to what is the state of Worcester, Massachusetts right now?
Boy, it is hard. So it's hard to put it into a nutshell. The city really does play off of the colleges. It really tries hard to connect with Metro West 495 belt in Boston. Your city leaders talk a lot about the importance of commuter rail,
Mm-hmm.
even when talking about building a critical mass of residents and workers, restaurants, everything you could do in Worcester, even right in downtown Worcester, they talk about having that commuter rail line, having a dozen or so trains every day going to and from Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is still so much connected uh, to Boston. About an hour by car, an hour and a half by commuter rail. Um, so it's trying to capitalize on a lot of that. It's so much cheaper to live in Worcester. I think that people are so hungry to find that critical mass. The biggest development you see in downtown Worcester now is actually on the site of the old Galleria Mall.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were kind of to go back about 10 years, that whole site, it's maybe 20 acres or so, um, was nothing. And all of a sudden, you've seen a lot build on those areas. You have a new hotel going up, new residences, other use. And it's kind of trying to go back to what Worcester was before the mall was there. They're putting the old street grid back in. They're having restaurants on the ground floor and residences or offices above.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Worcester is really desperate to have something like, or maybe not desperate, but at least hungry to have something that they can kind of hang their hat on in terms of whether it's a local sports team, thing to kind of show that illustrate how much the city is making strides. It'll never get out from under Boston's shadow exactly, and it's not fair to compare the two cities, but wanting to really stand more on itself, even while acknowledging that it still needs Boston and the Metro West suburbs in order to do so.
Now you've got like any mid-tier city like Providence or Worcester or even Hartford for that matter. You've got your own set of suburbs, if you will, rotating around the sun. Now I think of towns to the farthest south like Sutton on up, and then of course towns to the north and east of it, towns like Holden. Have they become more outlying suburbs of Boston, or do they still connect to Worcester as a community, or is there a tension there?
Hmm. I know it's hard to say. I wouldn't know enough necessarily to talk about, say, Sutton or Holden. I think certainly when you go east, if you can draw a line straight through from Worcester to Boston, each of those communities you touch, Shrewsbury, Westboro, Marlborough, Framingham, Natick on east are so, um, I think they do orient a lot east to Boston. Certainly Shrewsbury is very much a Worcester suburb, but it
Hmm.
doesn't take that far to go east to all of a sudden you're not really a Worcester suburb, you're Boston.
Right.
It's the same way if you're on the 95 belt, everything orients either south to Providence or north to Boston, or if you're
Right.
on Route 3. I grew up in Plymouth, and everything
Hmm.
orients right up Route 3 to Boston.
Right.
Um, there is so much of a gravity coming from Boston that I think even if you're in Warwick, let's say, or Pawtucket, you're very much a suburb of Providence. But to say that you're not part of the Boston area in the most broad definition, I don't think is accurate to say, just because everything, job growth, culturally, everything kind of stems out from there. So,
Hmm.
um, and it's even that, in Worcester's case, yeah, the population center is very much in the city, but there was a recent report that showed that in Metro West, and that's predominantly Framingham, Natick, Marlborough, Hudson, Milford, Hopkinton, towns like those, most of those workers in that whole region come from Worcester, much more than any of those individual communities or even from Boston or elsewhere. So it really is intertwined. You have a population center in Worcester, but so many of the big, uh, the multinational companies, TJX, Staples, BJ's, Boston Scientific, EMC are all in that Metro West area. So it really is. It's not just the two poles of Worcester and Boston. It's kind of everything in between.
Right. What role does the medical center play in terms of as an employer and as a presence in the city? Because you are host to one of the major medical facilities, really in New England.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. UMass Medical Center in the medical school is the largest employer. Also with the hospitals they also oversee, um, in Marlborough Hospital, for example. Um, so it's big as an employer. I think it's something like 15,000 people, but it's also kind of like with the other colleges. If you talk about the medical school, it's so much of a draw for young talent, for people to come study here, start maybe the residency program, and the city, the region really wants to hold on to all that talent. You hear the medical school mentioned a lot. It's not just another higher educational institution. It's something that is uh, creating the next doctors
Hmm.
for the region. So it's very critical for Worcester and central Massachusetts.
Right. Now the airport. I know the airport has had its ups and downs, and sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. Institutions like major hospitals, airports, universities are seen really as a barometer of an area's economy. They're easy to assess. The outsider who may or not be intimate to sort of the bleeding edge of the Worcester economy, the growth, the redevelopment that's taking place downtown. What status is the airport now? Are they back to doing regular flights? Is it a
The, the airport's definitely on a rebound, or trying to rebound. It's been, uh, I'll have to use an airline pun. It's been very turbulent.
right?
um, they've had a lot of airliners come and go over the years. They'll find that it's not very uh, necessarily reliable in terms of can you take off and can you land in rough weather.
Mm-hmm.
The airport is on the hilltop, which is
Excellent.
not the best location for it. So when you have fog and other weather issues, it
Mm-hmm.
impacts the airport much more than it would at Greene or at Logan, which are closer, um, not closer to sea level, but also not on a hill. Um, so a lot of airliners have come and gone. You've seen more recently that JetBlue is making a go of it.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be adding flights to and from Worcester once a day to JFK in New York. Within the last few years, they've added flights to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Orlando, Florida. There's also a smaller airliner that was doing flights this summer to Hyannis.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, JetBlue in particular, they're really reliant on a new landing technology that is being installed and is essentially complete at Worcester Airport. Something that will enable planes to take off and land essentially with next to no visibility. It's all guided through radar. So for the airport, it really is, they're putting a lot of faith in that $30+ million investment in this landing technology to bring flights back. So that will cover, the technology will cover the reliability factor. But for a lot of people, it's still hard to get to the airport. Not only was it built on top of a hill, but it was built miles away from any. So that makes it very difficult too. And just through competition, you could get practically anywhere that an airport on the East Coast would fly to. You could get to from Logan.
Mm-hmm.
Green has plenty of destinations. You have Bradley that serves the Hartford and Springfield area. You have Manchester, Boston, if you're up in southern New Hampshire in that area. So that it really does have a lot of competition. So it has to solve a few of those problems. And at the same time, there are commercial carriers that have been pulling out of some of these smaller airports in favor of going to a place like Logan, where they can more reliably figure that they will pack their planes, and if there's some issue with delays or a canceled flight, they know they have another flight going in or out of the airport
Right.
in a short period of time.
Interesting. In terms of the restaurant scene, now I know a lot of efforts being put. The listeners here in the Rhode Island area, we're inordinately proud of our restaurant scene here, and we're blessed because the Johnson Wales University, in conjunction with Brown and RISD, creates both a ready market for some of the more out there dining experiences, and at the same time provides a steady stream of talent. But I know a great deal of effort has gone into developing a restaurant scene, particularly in looking to bring people back downtown. Now, I know the downtown area has got quite a history going back, and in the last few years, like many central Massachusetts cities, has sort of fallen aside. What's being done downtown to bring people back downtown at night?
It is definitely relying on restaurants to bring people downtown. There's one development right on the Worcester Common called the Grid District that is going to have something like 5 restaurants just in about a span of a block.
Right.
A few of them are open now. There's a ramen noodle bar just opened this week. There's a great cafe. There's a few other restaurants that are slated to open as part of a comedy club later this year. And then there's a 110 Grill, which is part of a growing chain based in Westford, Mass, that is going to be opening there in a matter of a few months. There's another cafe based in Boston, Fuel. It's called Fuel that will be opening nearby. So it is really reliant on, people talk about having like an 18-hour city. You want to have places where people can grab a bite to eat. Or if you're in an office, you're not just maybe at the cafeteria or bringing food from home. Cities want to see people be out and about. That's what brings cities their vitality. I think a particular challenge for Worcester, it does have a lot of restaurants. It does have a good restaurant scene, absolutely, but it's spread out. Where I work on Shrewsbury Street has a ton of great restaurants, but it's it's a mile or two in length with other businesses spread in between, so it's not very walkable. There's the Canal District, which is south of downtown, that is a little bit the same, where you do have a decent critical mass, but it's not in an area where people are living and working so much where you can really build off of that. There's Highland Street, which is closer to WPI and Becker, that has several great restaurants, but that's not walkable to downtown either. So what the city has to do is try to increase all these number of restaurants without just picking from other areas, where if a restaurant moves from Shrewsbury Street to downtown, that's not a net gain for the city. You want to try to really build on that. And that's where it needs to have more people working downtown and living downtown, so they have that built-in clientele. So it really is known for a lot of the restaurants that have opened in Worcester recently are more for foodies. It's not like you're having just chains moving in, let's say, or fast food places. It really is a lot of great higher end restaurants with more creative menus.
Mm-hmm.
And you, so we do know that that number will increase. And I think people just want to see that continue. There is a development opening this spring in downtown Worcester, right on the site of the old mall, that has about 365 residences, and that will be critical once people start moving in there to have
Right.
that vitality around the clock.
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the geniuses of as we refer to him here, Vincent A. Buddy Cianci, of course, the famous slash infamous Buddy Cianci, was his recognition, really decades ago, that downtown of cities, urban areas, really weren't competitive any longer as centers of industry, as centers of manufacturing. For them to survive or even potentially thrive, they had to really become centers of entertainment. That you had to make it attractive in combination with universities, friends of universities, make it attractive for people to live in a downtown area, and somehow simultaneously stimulate the supporting businesses, whether it be supermarkets, dry cleaners, all the things that you take for granted when you live in the burbs. Those type of services have to be present. As a lead into the end of our first segment, how proactive and what is the, for lack of a better term, the power structure in this city like in terms of trying to encourage growth downtown? Can you give us sort of a landscape? And I'm not asking you to comment politically on any one individual leader, but what the structure of government and who the biggest boosters are.
Sure. Ed Augustus, the city manager, is certainly someone who prioritizes downtown, not necessarily at the expense of other neighborhoods, but the city really does prioritize and say if downtown is doing well, I think the rest of the city will do well by extension. Michael Trainer, the city's economic chief, is someone who really focuses on remaking some of these key parcels downtown. The city has a redevelopment plan in which they sort of pick a few properties where they see the most potential, places where they could go in. Maybe the city buys that building from the owner and then resells it to someone else who will redevelop it with a restaurant or a shop on the ground floor and residences above. The city's, as the region's Chamber of Commerce, Tim Murray is the former lieutenant governor.
Mm-hmm.
And also before that, he was the mayor and a city councilor in Worcester. So he has a lot of power in the area through all those connections and is really well regarded in the region. I say through those three in particular. And there's other companies. Hanover Insurance has been a big investor in the downtown neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
There really is a sense that this is a chance to kind of remake the city again, the neighborhood again. There's a lot of agreement, I would say, at this stage that the Galleria, although it brought in a lot of big tenants at the time, was not really an economic development success.
Mm-hmm.
They knocked down all these acres of downtown, all these restaurants and shops and homes, in order to bring in this mall where people could drive in and off the highway, drive into the parking garage, go to Macy's, for Eileen's, wherever, and then get back in their car and take off. It wasn't really developing or helping to develop the city and help other businesses. This is an opportunity to sort of start over again the way that cities want to build now in a more organic type of sense where you do have street activity, people walking around, people don't have to get in their car. You could, ideally, you could live and work and shop and eat all in the same neighborhood. That's not something that the city was looking to do 50 years ago when it was planning the Galleria Mall.
Right. Well, and that illustrates an interesting point because ultimately, facilities, and you'll get a hint of where I'm going with this, but facilities that are insular in nature, and my regular listeners know what sound bites are coming next, but insular in nature, self-contained, looking to create incentives to keep people within their walls, don't necessarily create the sense of neighborhood and community and outdoor economic activity that takes place when neighborhoods organically grow up, or in the case of certain malls, which are developed from day one to create, where egress and access to the particular stores is done through the outside, encouraging people then to disseminate amongst other stores and also out into the community at large. So you have some sort of halo effect take place where you've got this burgeoning economic activity that spreads out beyond four closed walls of your traditional 1970s, 1980s era mall. It's interesting. It's interesting that Worcester learned their lesson from that, as so many cities like Providence have yet to, because we continue to build edifices that seek to keep people inside.
Yeah, the Providence Place is an interesting case where it was built a little bit later on. It is more outwardly facing. You do have restaurants out on the street, but it's the same case where you get right in off 95, go right into the parking garage and never see the rest of the city.
Right.
It came at the very tail end of, they don't build enclosed malls like this anymore. It's interesting to think of what would happen if that site were to start over again now. I can't imagine any way you'd have an enclosed mall like that. Certainly not in Worcester's case. People argue either way of, would these cities have been better off if you didn't have, maybe if you never had a Macy's or a Nordstrom in Providence. That, I guess that could be up for debate. It just benefits the city in different ways.
Well, it's tough because if the business ultimately isn't locally owned, the profits from that business, it's capital flight. They leave to go somewhere else to be, the profits are there isn't a degree of reinvestment in the community that you get when you've got a locally owned, whether it be a chain or an individual store. Whereas it still hires a certain amount of folks, and some of those jobs are higher end, some of them are entry level. The dividends, the true income, the wealth that's created by the store leaves and goes somewhere else. Whereas when you look at some of the institutions at Providence or Worcester, the beauty of a WPI is that as universities by and large are still terrestrial, if you will. They're firmly rooted in a community, and you've got WPI is a serious research facility. You've got a lot of high-end work taking place there, in addition to their academic mission, and it employs people at high salaries who live in Holden and different exurbs, if you will, of Worcester, and then as a result, that money stays within that amorphous boundary that we'll call the Worcester economy, and that's where people benefit. When the money leaves, there's a quick hit, but you just on a fundamental economic level, you just don't see that kind of growth taking place where it's invested, reinvested, and reinvested in the community.
The tricky thing too might be that if Providence didn't have the several hundred stores and restaurants at Providence Place, would you have those jobs somewhere else? It might not be an either or. It might be you either have a mall with a lot of these chains, or else you don't have that at all. Maybe it would have been a much smaller mixed use or just residential development, or maybe an office building. Or in Worcester's case, Worcester would, in a way, I think, love to have a Macy's downtown, something of that scale, something of that level of investment. But it also does realize, at the same time, the city would, I think, undoubtedly rather have WPI downtown. If you're looking at the same amount of square footage where you'll bring in high-paying jobs, or you bring in students, or you'll have other companies that want to be located right next to WPI. That is a place, that's another kind of peculiarity of Worcester, is that you have 9 institutions of higher education, but none of them have a big presence downtown.
Right.
So it's very fractured in terms of they're all out in the neighborhoods, but not really in downtown. That's something that certainly Providence sees, with Brown and RISD being right on top of each other and basically being right in the center of the city. Worcester, unfortunately, does not have that.
Right.
And that's something that I think the city would certainly love to see those colleges try to invest in, bring in some type of center in the center of the city.
There's something here at the Coalition we call the Brown University Thayer Street Dining Plan, which is Dad's credit card used on a nightly basis at any one of a number of restaurants right on Thayer Street, right in the heart of College Hill, right in the heart of Brown and the Rhode Island School of Design, which, as you can imagine, breeds incredible opportunities for restaurateurs because, literally year round, because, Brown is a research institution, you've got, sophisticated palates looking for some place to venture out to. I mean, that's, I often say to folks, kindly or unkindly, that if it wasn't for Brown and RISD and JWU, that Providence would be Bridgeport.
You even see, that's the difference between New Haven and Bridgeport too. New Haven having Yale, and you have an incredible dining scene there, and for the same reasons you said, it's strange to think of how much Worcester could be different if the geography was just a little bit altered. Even Holy Cross is such a great school, but it's cut off very literally by the highway from downtown. So you really don't have much of an ability, just through the way it was built, to have a neighborhood around Holy Cross, which is too bad. You see the benefit of having that with Brown, for example.
Right, and that's the frustration. I'm going to take a quick break right now, and joining us on the line via the miracle, as we call it, of Skype, is Grant Welker. He is, of course, with the Worcester Business Journal, and a remarkable career for a young man in writing for several major newspapers here in New England, The Sun, and he's worked in Fall River, he's worked in Hartford, he's someone who really has intrinsic feel for what's happening in New England. And I would say, arguably, by working, and we've got the Providence Business News in Providence who do a great job, by working for the organization you do now, you see, and I go through your website, and you're reporting literally on small mom and pop businesses that are popping up and sometimes going away. You're talking about movers and shakers potentially reinvesting in the community. Your paper is a seminal source of information that's hands-on for a critically important region in New England in terms of what's happening economically on a day-to-day basis. So my hats are off to you guys, because it's just great stuff. It's what we refer to here in the coalition as original writing. So many folks are fixated, if you will, on the CNNs of the world, the Fox News, and really so many of those efforts are regurgitating quality reporting done, for example, by your organization, and pasteurizing it and kind of homogenizing it and watering it down and putting it out as news, whereas you can go to a publication like yours, and if folks are literally either looking to attend university there, they're looking to open a business there, it's literally break glass and instant immersion in all things Worcester and Central Massachusetts can be had at one source. So again, my hats are off to you, because you folks see an opportunity, you realize a vision, and it's something you guys execute on all the time. We need more of that in New England, quite frankly. It's community newspapers, whether they be business focused like yours are, or general reporting like the Lowell Sun, are a critical part of the fabric of New England. In their absence, we will all suffer on levels that I'm not sure we're cognizant of right now. I want to take a quick break. The sponsor for this hour of the coalition is Air Sciences, airsciences.net, run by Daryl Gould and his hardy crew. Mold remediation, premises disinfection. Right now, of course, we're still in the thrall, if you will, of arguably one of the worst flu crises here in the Northeast and around the country since the swine flu of several years ago. Airsciences.net, Daryl will offer a comprehensive, professional, documented, high-level disinfection, if you will, of your facilities. This is not some quick disaster cleanup. These folks employ professional-grade products, professional-grade biologicals to sanitize your environment, whether it be a standard work environment, whether you're retail and you're literally hosting dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of strangers on a daily basis walking in. If you host if your business is in the daycare business and literally you've got 20 or 30 charming little petri dishes showing up at your facility every day, Daryl can handle that too. He does a number of daycare facilities in the East Bay. As always, we ask folks to support those companies willing to sponsor independent media. Their involvement in the community is intense, and their willingness to take a shot on shows like the Coalition or any one of a dozen or so indie media outlets here in the Providence market means they care, they get it, they're involved, and as we like to say on the show, take it personally. So airsciences.net. Joining me again through the miracle of Skype is Grant Welker, he of the Worcester Business Journal. Grant, first of all, let's jump in. Where can folks find you and your organization on the web? How can they read more about you?
WBjournal.com online. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. Please do follow us. I couldn't agree more with what you were saying earlier. The internet has technology, social media has changed journalism so substantially, but as long as people value journalism and value local reporting, please pay for it. Journalism will be just fine as long as people value what it does for their lives, for democracy, for the culture. So I appreciate the plug.
No, absolutely. And see, this is what's so important. And you've got a fine local newspaper as well. I mean, Worcester is still well done in terms of media support. Folks like you are covering everything from the town council meetings to the zoning boards to the boardrooms. Without that vigilance, without that hyper focus on a community, the community suffers in ways that unfortunately are not really determined until sometimes it's too late. You all of a sudden those institutions leave and you realize just what you're missing on a day-to-day basis. So now is clearly you and I are living in a time when the delivery system of news has changed radically. We all know that. It's important that you support local institutions. So earlier you referenced Worcester has developed some type of comprehensive plan. They obviously spent a great deal of money and effort redeveloping and getting away from this insular mall complex. And lo and behold, one day the Pawtucket Red Sox rear their heads, just fresh off of a defeat 2 years ago in their attempt to build a stadium here in Providence, largely, as they would say, dissing the existing McCoy Stadium in Pawtucket, much to the displeasure of folks in Pawtucket who are inordinately proud, as they should be, of the history, the legacy, and the facility that is McCoy Stadium, regardless of some of the physical challenges it might be facing now. After that defeat, then they turn around and they want to build a new facility in Pawtucket. And as so often happens with professional sports, and it's ironic that we're having this conversation because literally one of the leading lights, if you will, of sports economics teaches at the College of the Holy Cross, or Holy Cross University is it now. But and then of course is Victor Matheson, and you've interviewed him. He is no fan whatsoever of the Build It and They Will Come complex. What's your read on it? First of all, does you do have a collegiate baseball league team there? You have the Futures Collegiate Baseball League. Yep, and we've interviewed their commissioner on this show a couple of times. And they, by all accounts, for a collegiate baseball league, they've done a wonderful job of filling the stands. I mean,
they have. Yeah, they've been very popular. Yeah, they're one of the best in collegiate baseball nationally in terms of attendance. Of course, Worcester is one of the bigger cities to host a collegiate team, but regardless, the city does certainly support the Worcester Bravehearts, right? And people, it's funny for how excited people are about the thought of having the Paw Sox. You do hear a lot of skepticism or worry in a caring way of, well, what about the Bravehearts?
Right.
We have a team. Of course, the collegiate team is not quite the same talent-wise as a AAA baseball team, but right, Worcester does show that they do like amateur baseball.
Well, and the question has been, and I'm not sure if Worcester folks have done this level of analysis. It's your typical attendee of a baseball game, a non-professional, non-Boston Red Sox baseball game in New England. Are they there to get outside for a night in a beautiful summer evening? Are they there?
I think so.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, my wife and I were fortunate to go to one particular Bravehearts game last summer with friends of ours and their two young daughters, and it was a great time. The girls certainly didn't care about the outcome of the game. They thought it was just fun to see everything there and have the food and entertainment between the innings and all that type of stuff.
Right.
It really is. When I was working in Lowell, there's the Lowell Spinners, which is single A baseball. It's about everything taking place off the field as much as it is on it.
Right.
Definitely.
So you've got that crowd. I mean, you've got a couple of tots, and we go out to see the Pittsfield uh, participants in that same league every year.
Mhm.
Um, so if you got a couple of little kiddos, it's actually the perfect scale. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah,
know,
very close to the field. And when I was a kid growing up in Plymouth, we went to see games at Fenway Park. We also went to Paw Sox games because
mhm.
it was so much more affordable. And as a kid, you still just enjoy being at a game and being that close to the field.
Right. So how do folks feel then about you know? There's always the excitement. There's the buzz factor, and there are, in my comment, not yours, there are civic leaders and business investors in the community who will hype that buzz to perhaps promote a sense of development or a sense of excitement in the city, regardless of how relevant that development would be to the growth of the city.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me of what people will say about Pawtucket, and it's absolutely true that people may know of Pawtucket throughout the country because of the Red Sox.
Mm-hmm.
People know of Foxborough all over maybe the world because of the Patriots. Uh, Although, just because you know of Pawtucket or you know of Foxborough, that's one thing, but to sort of monetize that or to put some tangible figure on that is so hard to do. Um, I don't spend time in Foxborough if it's not for a Patriots game. I'm not sure if a lot of people spend time in Pawtucket because they know of Pawtucket because of the Paw Sox.
Right.
Any city would sure you'd absolutely would love to have that name recognition,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a starting point. You don't want to be known just for having a professional team. Pawtucket would love to be a city that people would want to go to otherwise, or
Mm-hmm.
Foxborough would love to be a town where people will spend time, if not for a Patriots game.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is, they're kind of two separate things. You'd love to have the name recognition, but I think any city would want to say that they're known for more than just being home of a sports team.
Right. So then the question begs: Does you've got a development plan? It seems like it's well underway. There's always fits and starts. There's always the element of, in terms of economic development in the city these days, of a two steps forward, one step back. It's the natural ebb and flow. There's disappointments in some investments that seem like a slam dunk, and then sometimes you wake up one day and you've got this wonderful organization in your town, whether it be restaurant, whether it be college, whether it be private industry, that sprung up organically. Is first of all, is there a sense in the community that the community is willing to spend taxpayer dollars at any level in investing in this team, or is that, or do you have in your, and to be fair, I don't want to try and put you on the spot here, but is there a sense that you've got a handful of investors in the city or boosters who are looking to promote the notion of using taxpayer money?
So I don't know yet if there is an appetite for taxpayer money for this. For one thing, we haven't seen Worcester's plan for bringing the Paw Sox to
Mm-hmm.
town.
Mm-hmm.
That may depend on what ends up happening with the Rhode Island legislature. I'm not sure. Um, Rhode Island and Pawtucket at least know what the figures will be for how much they're expected to cover for the stadium. In Worcester's case, we don't know. We don't know how much of it will necessarily be on the team or on the public. And on the public side, how much of that may come through the city? How much of that will come through the state? One thing that makes Massachusetts unique in looking at public dollars for stadiums is that Massachusetts has virtually never paid anything
Right.
for stadiums. Uh, Gillette Stadium was privately built. The state did pitch in some infrastructure improvements. Fenway Park, when it was built over a century ago, was of course privately built. TD Garden is owned by the owner of the Bruins. So in
Mm-hmm.
each of those cases, you don't have public pitching in. And there has been some talk of building a new Revolution Stadium, the Revolution being owned by the Patriots owners as well. And there really hasn't been appetite in other cases for public dollars. And it hasn't even really come up that I've seen
Mm-hmm.
in the Mass legislature of, does the legislature want to do this?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even sure it's a priority for this for the legislature in Massachusetts. And that's the difference I find between Rhode Island and Mass in this case is Rhode Island being so much smaller, the Paw Sox have such an outsized influence on the city, and it really is a big topic for the State House in Rhode Island.
Right.
Massachusetts, everything is so Boston-centric. Anything beyond 495, unfortunately, doesn't really matter much to those that are in power.
Mm-hmm.
So to think that people on Beacon Hill would want to spend a lot of time even debating spending tens of millions of dollars on a ballpark that's going to be out in Worcester, I don't really see it happening, not in terms of it being a priority when there's so many other things going on.
Right. Talk about the neighborhood, because we just hear very generic comments about it, whether, and there's, again, so much misinformation. And again, I that's why, Mr. Walker, I appreciate you joining us tonight, because what we've already done tonight is really, lay out for people in the Providence area just a reality check on some of the emerging strengths of Worcester, some of the challenges they face, and we've already opened the window to discussion. The neighborhood that they would like to place the stadium in, or at least the boosters are promoting the stadium to be built in, that's pretty much a post-industrial sort of brownfield environment.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, it's close to downtown, but downtown and this site are separated by some raised railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not very accessible. There's not really much of a way to build off of it in that sense. Otherwise, it's the neighborhood's called the Canal District, which is a huge misnomer because there's no canal there, not anymore. But it is right. It's a pretty underdeveloped
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood. There are some old brownfields that are vacant. There are some restaurants nearby and a few other small businesses, but it's I'm trying to kind of think of comparing it to the area around McCoy, which is more residential.
Right.
There's a little bit of industrial uses nearby.
Mm-hmm.
It's really even less so than that in terms of being less developed. Despite being close to the highway and close to downtown, there really isn't much there. I think people see the potential for the ballpark there to build up the rest of that neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that you'd be able to better fit in more of those mixed uses that planners and officials want to see in a city if the ballpark were to come, thinking that these businesses would want to locate right next to a ballpark versus right now they'd be located next to a vacant, polluted site.
Right. Do you think folks really understand that ballparks? I mean, one of the motivating factors to building a new facility for the Pawtucket Red Sox is quite legitimate, and that is to additionally, as you use the word monetize, that's really the perfect word. The Pawtucket Red Sox owners would like to provide a higher level of monetization of the existing inbound traffic into a stadium by having a more sophisticated facility with dining, multiple use entertainment attached to it. I mean, that's the dream. That was the vision that has become Gillette Stadium / Patriot Place. And as someone, I work in Foxborough, coincidentally, and it's been largely realized. You have thousands of people shopping there all the time. Equally in part because there's a tremendous amount of wealth in the area, and there isn't really a shopping area that serves that community. But there's also a community.
Right. Yeah. Patriot Place is such a different case in some ways, I think, because obviously the Patriots are only playing a dozen or fewer home games a year.
Mm-hmm.
So usually people are going to be at Patriot Place when the team is not playing.
Right.
And it's also privately built, where all that money, talking about comparing it to Providence Place, is that all that money is really just going to the crafts.
Mm-hmm.
People will compare it to what a ballpark or what a stadium can do. They'll compare it to like Fenway, the neighborhood around Fenway Park, or around Wrigley Field in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, those stadiums were built over 100 years ago, and they were built in neighborhoods that were existing. In Boston's case, the Fenway neighborhood would be exploding whether the ballpark were there or not, because it's right next to BU and Northeastern and Berkeley and so many other colleges and businesses, and it's such a desirable neighborhood to be in anyway.
Mm-hmm.
People have also compared or contrasted what the neighborhood around McCoy Stadium is like, where that ballpark has been there for several generations. It doesn't have the restaurants and type of mixed use that people want to see for ballparks these days.
Right.
So it kind of does beg the question a little bit of, if there is so much demand, why has that not been seen at some point over the years with McCoy, whether there'd be some type of rezoning or something in place where the city would want to try to build around that ballpark.
Right, and that's to my point, exactly to my point. As someone, I'm obviously a critic of the proposed investment, and largely only because it's taxpayer dollars. I mean, I'm a free market corporate, anti-corporatist capitalist. If it's their money, well, they can roll the dice and take their chance and buy the land, and God bless them. But the owners of the Pawtucket Red Sox want to point to successes in cities where, not so coincidentally, already strong economies exist. And clearly, for example, they'll point repeatedly to Durham. And, there's something called the Research Triangle, and, there's wealth in the community. So what people looking for tax incentives or tax subsidized financing like to promote is that it's the chicken and egg, which came first. When in reality, a baseball team in any wealthy community will probably do well because there's the money and the willingness to go there. The baseball team, I often use the Gary, Indiana example, the Steelyard, which I pointed to on the Coalition Radio Facebook page. A third-party article written by a website that goes around and reviews ballparks around the nation pointed out that as of 2016, when the last review was written, Gary, Indiana was a pretty rough city. Some wonderful people live there. It's not for a want of trying, but they've suffered mightily during this industrial realignment this nation has taken, and that the baseball stadium has realized, in an environment very similar, if you will, to some of the issues that Worcester and Pawtucket faces, there's been no development around the baseball stadium. It has yet to realize any of the much vaunted goals, and while it's kind of a nice place to see a baseball team, there's not a lot of there. And I guess my question is do you get the sense, as someone who's a keen observer of the local community, that folks aren't going to fall for it? They're not going to buy into the baseball dream. As a good professor will point out, they're not going to fall for the hype. Or do you sense there's an overwhelming, deeply rooted excitement about having a AAA baseball team?
There definitely is excitement. We've seen, just anecdotally and hearing comments from people, I think people really are excited at the thought of having not only a minor league team, but the top affiliate of the Boston Red Sox. How many cities in this area would not be excited to have that? Mm-hmm. It has not reached the debate point of how much is it going to cost, what is it going to cost the average taxpayer, and whether it's city officials or homeowners could ask themselves, well, where would that money possibly better be spent? Mm-hmm. It's funny that we're having this debate during the Olympics when they're like the stadium debate on steroids, where cities spend billions of dollars to host the Olympics, and sports economists often are potentially, close to unanimously, say that Olympics do not pay for themselves, just right. Like stadiums don't. But yet you still see civic leaders. It's just something that's so hard for I think a lot of leaders to turn away from. They still want to be the person or the group of people who brings an Olympics or brings a team right. to an area where, even if the money doesn't show that it makes sense economically, there's still something that a lot of people just aren't able to really get away from saying, right. I know, but we want to have the team here anyway. So it certainly, strictly economically speaking, does not pay for itself when you're talking about tens of millions of dollars. As sports economists well point out, if it did pay for itself, these teams would own the stadiums and build the stadiums themselves. They do not. There are very few stadiums at the professional level or minor leagues that are paid for and owned by teams. They're almost entirely publicly financed and publicly owned,
Right.
which really puts all the risk on the municipality or the state or the county.
No, that's absolutely true. And in large part, my personal theory is that um, the presence of a skeptical media, in conjunction with, particularly independent media, in conjunction with the presence of social media, which allows activists to coalesce and organize and oppose these things in ways that were really impossible 4 or 5 years ago. That's how Curt Schilling got $100 million out of us, and Massachusetts said, "See ya." You know, we're able to, paint a realistic picture. You now have, in arguably one of the bluest states in the nation, Rhode Islanders walking around and saying things like, "Well, really, government has no role being involved in free markets or private business. That, regardless of the promises made, why don't the owners just simply build their own stadium and reap all this wealth for themselves?" Which, as an opponent, I encouraged greatly. I'll be the first one to buy a ticket if they just built the damn stadium on their own.
It does sound ironic. I think part of it may be, as we were saying before, Massachusetts can say we don't really need these types of developments. If you're Boston, you don't need a new stadium for the Revolution, let's say,
Right.
or something like that, because land is valuable enough that you'll have other companies that will want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny to see, even in other cases, how much public money was spent on, say, the new Yankee Stadium when the Yankees threatened to move out of New York City. People will say, you got to be kidding. The Yankees aren't going anywhere. It's not like the Red Sox are going anywhere. The Boston Red Sox, that is, necessarily either. But teams are great at making threats, really, or kind of bluffing and pitting municipalities or states against each other. I can't help but wonder whether Worcester may be waiting to see what happens in the legislature in Rhode Island before putting its own bid out there. Otherwise, you're kind of bidding against yourselves. But if you wait and see, well, what does Rhode Island offer and how does that go? And then Worcester is able to make its bid.
Mm-hmm.
I also tend to think that, all things being equal, Worcester will have to make a stronger bid than Pawtucket would or Rhode Island would, because the Providence area is bigger, population standpoint. It does have that historic tie.
Mm-hmm. The marketing dollars there's just more money here from nearby Massachusetts, nearby the southern Boston market. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let me ask you this: the political culture in Worcester. Now, in Rhode Island, one of the terms that we use here locally, my term, not yours, we call it economic racism, where large organizations will go into communities, and whether it be malls, private prisons, stadiums, aquariums, or if you're of a certain age, you go, every boy needs a band from the Music Man. If you're a certain age, you'll quote The Simpsons and say monorail, monorail, monorail. They'll prey on those economic fears, and they'll prey on that desire to break out of this miasma that so many central New England cities have fallen prey to. I mean, when you look at the challenges of central Massachusetts, Rhode Island, whether it be broken schools, broken infrastructure, budget deficits, permanent loss of industrial jobs. I mean, I don't want to make anyone nuts here, but the opioid epidemic, which has hit central Massachusetts and Rhode Island so intensely. These lands of broken dreams, if you will, where everyone wants to hitch on to something, everyone wants hope, and folks who challenge that then are seen as, the term here in Rhode Island, by the way, as espoused by a former governor, is we are called nattering nabobs of negativity. Say that 3 times fast. Does the political culture exist in Worcester, in your opinion, that folks who are the boosters for this, and if Mr. Augustus decided to get behind it, where it would just happen, or do you see, do you see a culture of opposition that would pop up for the type of large subsidy? I mean, we're talking anywhere from $75 to $100 million in the form of bonding, actual subsidies, tax stabilization agreements, fill in the blanks. Is there a culture ready to oppose that?
Uh, it's hard to say. I think one thing that we have to or could go off of is looking back at the effort a few years ago to bring the Olympics to Boston.
Right.
A lot of that went around how bad would traffic be, what would the development be in terms of what properties would you need to take for stadiums or infrastructure. But so much of it was also on, do we even need this
Right.
from a more economic standpoint? So in looking at that sense, I would say there'd be a lot of skepticism, certainly, of whether it's worth it financially. It's hard to say otherwise because truly it hasn't even been enough of a priority, or maybe we're just not far along in this process yet to even see what the appetite is like at a state level. If Massachusetts is going to be like Rhode Island in terms of how much the state is picking up versus the city, it's going to be a lot of state dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't even really been discussed in any type of depth. The governor has come out in a very general sense in saying that he supports a bid, but hasn't got to the point of saying that the city, or rather the state, would pony up a certain amount. It's hard to see again that a state that is so Boston centric would want to spend that type of money in Worcester.
Mm-hmm.
It may happen. Maybe people will feel like they have the sense of ownership for the Boston Red Sox and they want to see the top farm team also in Massachusetts, but that hasn't been any type of dialogue that I've seen.
No, and it's interesting because you juxtapose that to actual attendance, and all of the minor league baseball teams in the orbit of the Boston Red Sox, actually, with the exception of a 2,000 count increase in the Red Sox, the Pawtucket Red Sox, I should say, all of the teams showed declines in attendance last year, including the Lowell team. Attendance went down everywhere, universally. I've often said that I'll get my Worcester Red Sox tickets on the way home from my next Hartford Patriots game. There's a real sense. Now, this is what's so great about this conversation, because twofold. Number one, here in Providence, incredibly enough, compared to what the conversation we're having, there's a sense that it's, believe it or not, and it's being supported by members of the media who are very pro stadium development here. That the deal is already done and they're getting ready to move to Worcester, which is fascinating because based on our conversation here, there really has been no public high-level analysis of this at all, has there?
Right. Yeah. No bid or proposal from Worcester's end has been put out publicly. Certainly, the city council would have to approve something. Whether it would go to the ballot, I'm not sure. I think that's been discussed a bit in Rhode Island, whether it should go to the ballot or not. Whether Worcester is waiting to see what happens in Rhode Island first, I'm not sure. But it has been moving slow, at least publicly, in that stance that we still just don't know what this would look like.
It's fascinating. It's truly, for lack of a better term, a tale of two cities. I would commit to you again that there are those here in reading the tea leaves here in Rhode Island who firmly believe that the deal is already done. This is astonishing. And again, is that myth being perpetrated and perpetuated, if you will, both, in an attempt to play one city off the other?
It could be. I think maybe a little bit from the media's perspective. If you're in Rhode Island, there's a little bit of that fear or worry of, oh boy, are we going to lose the Paw Sox? So if people are naturally thinking about that, then it's certainly a question the media would want to cover of could this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're from the Worcester perspective, people are excited thinking of, could the city land Paw Sox? Mm-hmm. So you do have, I think people tend to get ahead of themselves and thinking of, could this happen from Worcester's perspective, or could it happen from Providence or Pawtucket's perspective? People tend to, I think, kind of fear the worst if you're in Rhode Island, or get ahead of yourselves and think, oh boy, I can really picture a stadium in Worcester. Mm-hmm. But it is still early in a lot of ways. Certainly, it's not up to either of those areas anyway. Ultimately, it's up to the team.
Right.
No matter what Worcester offers as a proposal or whatever the
Mm-hmm.
Rhode Island legislature approves, the team could still decide to do whatever it wants, or it could choose another option. It could
Right.
choose to go maybe somewhere else, and uh, they don't have an ability to look to Hartford because Hartford has its own team. But maybe they open up bidding to possibly go somewhere else. Even not that that's necessarily been talked about,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but it is a playbook for a lot of teams in other areas that they do pit uh, one area against another. For years, that was said to be the case with the NFL, of how many teams ended up talking their home city or their home region into paying for a new stadium. They say, well, we could move to Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Now that's not an ability anymore because Los Angeles has its own teams.
Right.
But there have always been cities or always been teams that will say, we could move elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you still see that in leagues everywhere, and whether it's at the major league level or in the minors.
Right. The land that's under development right now that they're considering for the stadium, and you call it the Canal District, even though there's no longer a canal. Have the owners of that land publicly commented? Is that considered city? I mean, by what
I don't
method are they going to talk about acquiring that
I don't know that they've talked about it publicly. Um, I would have to read the tea leaves a little bit and think that that land would have to be uh, available, at least in theory, to the team
land? Mm-hmm.
if that site is mentioned so much by whether it's the people on the city side or the team thinking that maybe they could go there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd imagine they have to think that that site is certainly available. It's undeveloped now, so it's not like
Mm-hmm.
they would seem to have a lot of competition for that site.
Right. So in summary, then, you've got a city that is in fits and starts, and that's my term, not yours, emerging from a difficult period. Well, the city somewhat is challenged by its geography. Um, it's always unfortunate when you look at the modern interstate system, I should say, how often it has become a barrier for organic development of a city. How very often one segment of the city will be cut off. There's almost an economic Berlin Wall going down the middle of it, and the kind of um, natural growth that inhibits. It's always sad to hear that. We suffer from the same thing here in Rhode Island. In fact, throughout New England, we've managed to build highways and rail lines on some of the nicest property and some of the most economically what should be viable property available. Coastline railroads lines. That makes perfect sense, right?
That's right. Yeah, look at Fall River. I know from working there, they put 195 right smack through the center of the city. They knocked down the beautiful old city hall to build a highway right through the middle, probably thinking at the time, well, this is great. We can have this city be so accessible from the highway. But what you did is you really just put a scar right through the middle of the city, or in Hartford or in Springfield's cases, or in New Bedford's cases, where you put highways, yeah, right along the waterfront, where it might not have been so desirable of a place to build at the time, but now everyone wants to be on the waterfront if you can help it. And there are cities where it's just not even feasible to do so.
Right. These large highways, it's interesting. We had an opportunity here in Rhode Island recently to redo one of those scars. That's a great way of phrasing it. And in the rush to provide union construction jobs, again, my comment, not yours, they decided to just rehab the scar, put more scar tissue over it rather than reunify neighborhoods that 100 years ago were vibrant and now just sort of, think about the highways you drive through. How many of them have teeming nightlife right up against with the highway? I think we've all learned that traffic calming is actually what brings people into communities and what creates growth. And yet we continue to double down on this. This canal district, is it easily accessible from 290 or 495?
It is. Yep. Yeah, it's right off the highway. It is accessible. So from that standpoint, although Kelly Square, which is infamous in Worcester for being so chaotic, where all these streets come together without any
I've got lost
traffic, is right off 290. So it is accessible from that standpoint. uh, there hasn't, again, to think of the desirability of the neighborhood as it stands today, there hasn't been a lot of new development
Hmm.
in the Canal District because it is cut off from downtown by the raised rail lines. It is cut off from Shrewsbury Street where there's so many restaurants by the highway, or it's cut off from Holy Cross by the highway. You do have Clark University sort of nearby as well, but it is in a little bit of a strange spot where it is so close to so many other things, but just yeah, through the way the geography has happened with infrastructure, that it is a little bit by itself.
Interesting. Well, I mean, it's the pages have yet to be written. It's clear from tonight's conversation that there are huge differences in each city's analysis of where the other city stands and where they are with respect to the process and the issue to itself. Um, it's funny because you and I are both, boots on the ground with this type of information, yet we come to this meeting and we realize that we've got completely different perspectives on the progress of said development. It's kind of astonishing. Um, well, again, I do want to take a moment. I want to give you the opportunity to plug your book, to talk about. You've written a book about the market basket.
That's right. Yeah, when I was at the Wall Sun, I was very fortunate to cover the Market Basket story of a few years ago.
Tell us a little bit about that because it's interesting. It's already it was a fascinating study in consumer loyalty and worker loyalty in a time when so little of it exists. That and you had the family drama, you had the two Arthurs, you had everything imaginable in this sort of twisted New England morality play, and
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to reading it because
Yeah, thanks. And it's something that if you're in Providence or in Rhode Island, probably have heard a lot more about Market Basket than you've really been able to experience it yourself. There is one in Attleboro now.
right.
There's one that opened a few months ago in Fall River. There's one in Oxford, which is not too far if you're in northern Rhode Island. Uh,
Mhm.
it sounds cliche to say, but Market Basket was always a story that like no one had ever heard before.
Mhm.
Here's a case where people in this company, workers put their job on the line to get their old boss back. uh, if there was any type of labor movement before, it would be for better hours, better pay, better working conditions. If it was about their boss, they probably wanted to kick the boss out. In this case, people at Market Basket so loved where they worked, they so bought into the company culture that once Arthur T. DeMollis, the CEO, was fired, they felt like they actually had almost no choice but to take an action like that.
Mhm.
It was one of the most incredible things I remember hearing from workers is to anyone watching this story, you think, how crazy are you to put your job on the line and say, I'm not going back to work until my boss is back? But they actually felt like their job at Market Basket was so unique
Mhm.
that they would not have wanted to go back to their job if it were to become like working at one of Market Basket's competitors.
Right.
They felt like it was truly such a, a family atmosphere. That's another cliche to say you feel like you're part of a family and not a company, but they really do feel that way. They did feel that way. And what made it all possible was not really the role necessarily that just the workers played, but the role that the shoppers played. It went from me as a reporter covering this thinking, how could this possibly work once the employees walked out, to thinking, how could this not work once you went into the stores in those days and you saw that all the aisles were completely empty because people in the region also loved shopping at Market Basket so much that they said, we're not going to shop at Market Basket until Arthur T is back. So you had 90% or more of the company's sales went out the window once this whole thing started. And in the matter of a month and a half, the company was essentially brought to its knees and possibly on the brink of insolvency because people just loved this company so much.
Mhm.
They were willing to be stubborn and do what they needed to do, take a stand in order to save it. Uh, I was so fortunate to cover it and to be able to still talk about it and to write about it in the book has been great. It really does provide lessons to people, whether you're a business owner or you're just thinking about it from a shopper's perspective, that
Hmm.
here is a company that it's a multi-billion dollar company. They have 80 or so locations across the area, and yet they're still run like a mom and pop in some ways, where they just value their workers unlike you would see anywhere else, with profit sharing and bonuses and
Right.
giving their employees voices where they felt empowered enough to want to speak out when their boss was fired. It was incredible.
Yeah, no, I can remember the type of store watches that were going on. Probably, I probably saw you report on it at the time. Um, the you know, because at the time, and currently the Lowell Sun. And by the way, if folks have never had a chance to read the Lowell Sun, they really need to. Um, for a city that's smaller than Providence to maintain that type of newspaper is astonishing. Um, so you had the spectacle of news reporters almost on this sort of uh, near death watch. They were literally monitoring store conditions around the block. If a delivery was made to a market basket, it was met with this unbridled glee of people literally driving down as if out of I've never seen anything like it. I'm a junkie for business, and I can to this day I can't think of really any businesses that have that type of loyalty left. I
There, there are very few, and really not to disparage any of Market Basket's competitors, but you really can't imagine something like this happening at a Shaw's or a Stop and Shop or
no, you cannot.
no one at shoppers of those chains would never even know who the CEO of those companies is. And yet, especially if you're in the Merrimack Valley area, everyone knows Arthur T. DeMoulas.
Right.
And uh, companies can, yeah, business can tend to get a bad name where if you're all about maximizing shareholder value, that's your fiduciary duty, sure. But to a lot of shoppers, whoever your customers may be, that's not popular for them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Market Basket's a company where they are profitable in
Mm-hmm.
a very notoriously low margin industry, and yet they say it as, they're not a grocery business. They're about people, and they just happen to serve people
Right.
groceries.
Right.
Uh, they're a company that doesn't just look at the bottom line, or they're not just looking at quarterly earnings reports or what is your profit margin year to year, quarter to quarter.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like if they take care of their people, if they take care of their customers, their employees, their vendors, all that stuff will sort of take care of itself. So it really does show to other businesses that you can do things differently like that and still be just as profitable, just as successful, grow just as much as any of those companies. If people want to kind of compare or contrast it um, to a Walmart, which is more notorious for having paid low wages, uh, or there's like a Costco at the other end, which is more like what Market Basket does, where they pay their employees more, but they look at it as not always trying to minimize employee cost, but kind of maximize it in terms of
Mm-hmm.
reducing turnover,
Right.
or to put it as not minimizing a negative. They feel it as if people buy in, they feel like they work somewhere where they know that their voice is valued, and if they know that they work hard and do well, that they can rise right to the top.
Now
Uh,
it's been a
that's a
couple it's been a couple of years since the drama. There was a fear at the time that I guess in order for him to and please correct me if I'm wrong, in order for him to buy out essentially his cousins, the other Arthur, and I think it was the other Arthur's sister, that they would have to incur debt, which had always been minimized. They were always a notoriously lean and notoriously efficiently run company based on current cash flow. So, as someone who's so intimate with the events, the chain, the business, the culture, flash forward a couple of years to 2018, have they been able to retain the profitability and the culture while at the same time growing while at the same time absorbing the debt necessary for him to capitalize and take over the business.
They've done great since this happened. Yeah, as a private company, we don't know their financials, but I've been told that although um, being in debt is a burden
Mm-hmm.
for them, it's not so burdensome that they've had to change the way they do things. And you're right, and that was a fear, as some people saw it, because MarketBasket is notoriously a company that never went into debt.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't a company that said, all right, we want to open X number of stores in the next year or the next 5 years. Now let's go scout out the locations and we'll go into debt to finance that. That's just not what they've done. But I think of MarketBasket as it's a company that's always done so well, despite a lot of these battles within the family, or certainly from a few years ago, a battle that included shoppers and employees and vendors.
Mm-hmm.
They've always done so well despite all those other factors. And now we see a MarketBasket where Arthur T has the support of his board of directors, and it's a company that is just cruising. I think a lot of people probably saw what was happening a few years ago, and whether you're in the Providence area and now you have the Attleboro location, let's say, to go to, maybe you always thought, what is it about MarketBasket? Why are people so crazy about this company?
Right.
And then you have a chance to shop there yourself, and you see the customer service really is different than going to a lot of other places. The prices are as low as you'll get anywhere. It feels a bit like stepping back in time, going to a MarketBasket, where if you're looking for a particular item and you stop someone in the aisle and I'm looking for whatever it may be, they don't just say, oh yeah, that's down in aisle 5 and kind of get back to what they're doing and almost brush you off like you can tend to get with some other retailers. They'll actually take you right down to aisle 5. They'll show you exactly what you're looking for, and they'll say, do you need anything else? You go in the checkout aisle and they have someone always bagging your groceries. They don't have self-checkout aisles like you see at other places, because as they see it, they want it to be like, they want a human being waiting on a human being.
Right.
So if you're scanning and bagging your own groceries, that's not really the MarketBasket way. So the company, again, without knowing their financials particularly, they're doing great, possibly better than ever in the few years since this whole thing has come to conclusion.
My last question on this is what's fascinating. I'm a frequent critic, if you will, of the business culture here in Rhode Island that's perpetuated by our government. It's an extremely difficult state to do business in. Taxes are very high. Capital formation is very difficult. The bureaucracy is brutal. It can be rather Kafkaesque at times. What's fascinating to me is that MarketBasket literally now rings our state, perched, if you will. You know, I get the sense and I shop at the South Attleboro store, that literally it's so close to Rhode Island that if you all of a sudden leapt out the back window, you'd be in Pawtucket. My mission, my request to you is somehow, surreptitiously or otherwise, find out, is it a conscious decision to stay out of Rhode Island? Because, yikes.
I don't know. Yeah, I really can't say. I know that they're looking at expansion, generally speaking. I can't say. I don't know whether it's in Rhode Island. But it's also a company that grows very methodically.
Right.
And whether it has something to do with the state borders or government or not. I remember working in Fall River when the MarketBasket opened in New Bedford, and people across the whole region were crazed about MarketBasket. And as someone who grew up south of Boston, I didn't really know much about MarketBasket.
Right.
So that was in some way my preliminary introduction to the company, was hearing about how fanatical people were about this company. And yet it still took, probably a decade or so after the New Bedford location opened until they opened one in Fall River.
Right.
That's just the way they do. They're just very methodical about where they open up. So I can't say whether that has anything to do with government. I think, and I hear the same thing in Worcester. People in Worcester would love to have MarketBasket, and it's just something that I think will come in due time.
Well, and it's fascinating because as I remember, one of the controversies that really blew open, and it was only a small part of it, that blew open the relationship between the two Arthurs, was in fact the South Attleboro store, and that was started, put on hold, started, put on hold. It had been a Shaw's, ironically, and when they were rebuilding it, and I remember so clearly that it would appear that even the gradual expansion that they're taking place was in itself controversial to the family. Um, but I'm glad to see cooler heads have prevailed, and a uniquely New England institution and organization continues to profit because, quite frankly, get beyond the biotech borders of Boston, and there aren't a lot left. It's a challenge, and finding that type of cradle to grave uh, long-term employment for folks who are middle income and and working folks is quite frankly critical to this region because quite frankly we have so little of it. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We actually went an hour and a half. And I think you wondered at one time whether or not you'd have enough to talk about. And I get the sense we could probably talk for hours. Grant Welker, he's the news editor of the Worcester Business Journal. Let me see if I get the website right. It's wbjournal.com. You can be found at Twitter at Grant S. Welker. I'm sure folks you'd encourage tips, or as Howie Carr in Boston says, if you've got a business tip or you want to drop a dime, it's a great place to go. The website it's a wonderful website, replete with, and again, what I love about it is you're covering big stories, big businesses, stories like the Paw Sox extensively, and yet at the same time, threaded throughout the paper is tales of local markets opening and closing, local businesses. It seems like uniquely you folks have your finger really on the pulse of what's going on in Worcester. So my hat's off to you.
Thank you, and thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about this topic.
Now, and we'll be. I just sense that you and I will be talking again because my takeaway again, and it'll be a little repetitive. My takeaway again is that the folks in Worcester and the folks in the greater Providence Pawtucket region have completely different perceptions of where this process is, and I think tonight will be invaluable in bridging those and coming up with a real cogent reality of where we're at, and that's critical, I think, for the stakeholders, for taxpayers, for all of us to understand, and let's keep the conversation going about Providence and Worcester. They're two great stories waiting to be told.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break right now. Again, a big thank you to Grant Welker from the Worcester Business Journal, wbjournal.com, for joining us and kind of giving us I'll call the course Worcester 101 today. We're going to continue through this conversation. Folks, again, we're going to take a quick break. This is The Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting on the worldwide Coalition Media Network, here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. We just spent, an hour and a half talking about a tale of two cities, Worcester and Providence. We're going to take a quick break right now. We'll have a little conversation in our Yacht Club soda break. See, Providence, we have Yacht Club soda. I don't think you guys have anything as good as Yacht Club soda. Yacht Club soda break, and then joining us in the 8 o'clock hour, folks from the Goldwater Institute, and we'll talk about one of our dearest issues to our heart, and that is, of course, your First Amendment rights when you're on a college campus. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we are back. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center. CoalitionRadio.us, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Grant Weckel joined us from the Worcester Business Journal in the first hour. It turned out to be an hour and a half. I can't wait to get that up on the site. Again, my takeaway, if I seem a little gobstruck by it, my takeaway is that how two cities, people intimately involved in the politics and the business community in two cities can have two completely different perspectives as to what the status of this proposed investment, using the Coalition Radio air quotes. Wow. Here in Providence, we're thinking it's a done deal. And surprise, 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 the local community, including the media, is not even really up, has been made aware. No shot at them, but they haven't been keyed in and clued in to where the status of this really is, which is why I get back to my statement. I'll go to my first Woo Sox game and pick up the tickets, I should say, on the way home from the next time I go see the Hartford Patriots play. Yikes. Interesting, too, his rather clear, precise analysis of the economic potential of this. I'll leave his words stand on their own. I won't attempt to interpret them, but I think it's fascinating that someone with a business background like his would see the reality of where it stood and where it stood within the Worcester community. This, of course, is one of my favorite moments of the show, and that is the Yacht Club soda break. Tonight, the choice is grape or strawberry. Now, if I have the grape or their orange, they've got a couple of takes on orange. Grape makes you feel like a little kid, right? I just spoke for an hour and a half, so grape soda. Again, I'm 8 years old all over again. Although my good friend Tony might say I've never really progressed beyond that. Yacht Club soda. YachtClubBottlingWorks.com. Wonderful soda, natural flavors. It tastes like soda did 30 years ago. The big game is beyond us, fortunately. But we're all doing a lot of work around the house. On a night like tomorrow night, where it's going to be snowed in, you might not feel like having a drink or an adult beverage. You might be going to a party soon, whatever. Don't drink the crap in the plastic bottle. You've got the very best soda in America right here in Rhode Island. It's a Rhode Island institution in business for over 100 years. It's the original boutique soda before we even knew that there could be such a thing as a boutique soda. The grape is refreshing. It's icy cold. Let's just say one of your jobs is being a professional blabbermouth, like me, where you talk and talk and talk and talk. Nothing refreshes quite like a Yacht Club soda. Wow. So let's talk for a couple minutes and we'll take a break and get into our 8 o'clock segment. Again, we're going to be having folks from the Goldwater Institute come out and talk about the status of campus free speech, as well as some additional developments. Here you have, in our last hour, a local business publication, again, with a real feet on the street, if you will, intuitive feel for what's going on in the marketplace. And in the next hour, we're going to have an international think tank representing here on the coalition. What's my reaction to that? In both cases, we're going to talk about the websites that each organization maintains and makes available to the community. What could they possibly have in common? You'll hear me say again and again, great original reading, great focus on issues, great writing. They develop, study, research, analyze issues in a manner which the conventional media has long forgotten. Why, oh why would you go to a FoxNews.com, a CNN, or one of our local papers of record website when so much of it is regurgitated nonsense handed to you through the filter of a personal private interest, while at the same time ignoring the facts surrounding an issue, preferring instead to engage in idle political chit-chat, or as we like to say in the coalition, handicapping of an issue. We're entering election season soon, and there are going to be a lot of, as the vernacular would have been in the 20th century, dark horse candidates. but candidates who have a story to tell, who have real commitment to the community, who have real world experience, and are in a position where they can provide real solutions to the challenges that face Rhode Island. So here's the analogy. You can continue to immerse yourself in the pablum being generated by the what do they conservatives call it, the lamestream media. You can continue to immerse yourself in reporting upon reporting, which so much of the media does, rather than engage in original thought, original research. Or you can go to websites like WBJournal.com or Goldwater Institute or some of their websites, righttotry.org, and actually get firsthand analysis, sophisticated thought, accessible writing. There should be a hashtag for "It's not fake news." In both of those publications, so different, one regional, one national, one focused on a local business market, one focused on constitutional issues, you'll find that it's remarkably bias-free. The only bias that each publication has is to reporting the facts and to developing the argument, developing the discussion, giving people an education in a local issue or a national issue, giving folks an education on a local business market, or at the same time giving them the underlying facts, supporting dogma for a constitutional issue. We found out a few weeks ago that the paper of record in Rhode Island, as we like to say, is nothing more than an internship program for government. There are those who are horrified that it could never be. Seamlessly, reporters moving back and forth from Halitosis Hall into reporting, back across the aisle. Doesn't have to be like that. The way you change that is by altering your reading and viewing habits. Spend time with Steve Alquist, Russ Moore, Kate Nagel, Tony Jones, or even me. Allow us to bring to you leading thought creators, thinkers, philosophers. Allow us to deliver that to you. A couple ways you can do that. I don't usually get into the like or the social media thing, but if you're listening to this show right now, if you could take a moment to like the Coalition Radio on Facebook. If you could take a moment to follow us on Twitter at Coalition_Radio or PO Taxpayer or at Pawtucket is Home. That helps us, and it only takes a second. It allows us to cast a wider net to routinely deliver information in ways that are cost-effective and affordable. We rely largely on local businesses to support this show. Nowhere else are you going to get some of the bleeding edge issues that we're going to continue to cover as in the past. Raw discussions of economic, business development, tax law, or some of the quote-unquote social justice issues that we're going to be tackling in the near future. Continuation of our efforts in free speech rights. We're going to be talking and getting back to our roots and discussing legalization, if you will, of cannabis, decriminalization of sex work. We're going to be covering all those issues. You're not going to get that on the local television station of record. No, instead, they'll spend a couple of days covering the tragedies of the last few days in a manner that purports not to sensationalize, but merely, instead, using a discussion of the sensationalization of those issues as a way to encourage their own sort of fetid clickbait. You'll never get that here. I call that outrage porn. I also call it, what's your favorite color journalism? There are serious issues to be discussed, analyzed, and challenged as we go forward. We're entering the election season. We're also looking at one of the most poorly constructed budgets in Rhode Island history, relying on monies that don't exist, that are not even legal. Good friend of the show, Representative Bob Lancia, pointed out this week that the scoops he's talked about a number of times on this show continue unabated and now have actually begun to affect and impact folks' personal safety in the form of what's going on down at 911. It's hideous. And it's only through a well-informed public that we can continue to challenge this and say no. We might be the voice of no here. Independent media may be the voice of no. And then you will have to deal with the power elite attempting to perpetuate the notion that we are simply negative without alternatives. We promote alternatives here on the Coalition, as do my compadres across the social media and indie media network. We'll continue to do that. Our opposition is simply not rooted in opposition to a particular idea. It's in opposition to a failed, flawed philosophy, but it's mated with ideas for progress. When we point out what's wrong, we're right back at you with ideas on how to make it right. And that's what we do here at the Coalition. So again, take a moment this weekend. Eastside Marketplace, you can purchase your Yacht Club soda. Many fine restaurants across the state. If we do get snowed in for a little time tomorrow night, kick back, watch a movie, enjoy a cold beverage. Yeah, that's good. With friends and family. Take a moment this weekend. I saw one sign promoting, so this is celebrate 44 of our 45 Presidents Day weekend. Take a moment to reflect on history, but also continue to reflect on where we're going, both as a state and nation, particularly after the tragic events of the last few days. So, we're going to take a quick break right now. We're going to be off the air for a couple minutes. We're going to queue up our next guest. You are listening to the Coalition on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network, broadcasting live here at Go Local Prov. At the Go Local Live Broadcasting Center, 90 Way Bossa Street, in the heart of the city we love. It's Friday night. It's relatively nice out. We're getting snow tomorrow night, so please take a moment to go out tonight and enjoy any one of La Prov's, CF's, The Buckets, fine restaurants. Come on downtown, get out while there's still time to get out, party a little bit, let loose, find a place, have one of our fine microbrews, find yourself a foolproof ale, find yourself a Yacht Club soda, and let it rip tonight. There's great live music all around this state. Clubs like the Met. There's great coffee at places like the Coffee Exchange. There's great food at restaurants like Bees, Ken's Ramen Noodles, Faux Horn down on Ann Mary Street in Pawtucket. Take a chance, get out tonight, have some fun, and stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we are back. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network. Here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. We've already told quite a few tonight. But I am privileged on, well, what appears to be somewhat of a routine basis to enjoy the company and learn at the feet of a variety of members of an organization we've grown, quite frankly, to revere here in Rhode Island, and that, of course, is the Goldwater Institute. You've heard me say this before, but briefly, it's quite the unique organization. Simultaneously a think tank, an organization that gets involved in the nitty-gritty, the sausage making of creating legislation and working cooperatively with legislators around the country to enact legislation that supports liberty in its purest forms, whether it be free speech or whether it be right to try or any one of a number of issues in facing really some of the biggest challenges here both in our government and our culture today. At the same time, they employ investigative journalistic techniques with real writers and reporters, while at the same time often quite willing to take it to court, to enforce, again, the sacred liberties that we were born with, that were endowed to us by birth. Quite a story to tell. We've been fortunate here. We've had a number of organizations join us in the air, but I'm not aware of an organization that approaches liberty in such a more comprehensive manner than the Goldwater Institute. And again, they're nice enough to join us tonight. Jonathan Butcher, he's here. He's a senior fellow at the Goldwater Institute. He has researched and testified on educational policy, school choice, educational funding, and of course, what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. We'll cover all those areas, but I'll talk a little bit about tonight about, as I mentioned, the type of model legislation that they're bringing around the country. And in this case, one of the issues that's near and dearest to our heart, and that is free speech on campus. If you're listening to the Coalition for the first time, we are in the heart of the College Belt of New England. Yet at the same time, this same said College Belt has somewhat become a poster child for intolerance, speech intolerance. In my mind, some of the worst type. Someone who is fundamental to my, I'll call it role as a hobbyist. I would never deign to put myself as a peer with some of the folks we've had on the show, but as quite a hobbyist when it comes to civil liberties, studying it, researching it. One of my favorite writers of all time was a gentleman by the name of Nat Hentoff, who was both a jazz reporter and a civil liberties reporter at the Village Voice. And maybe he didn't coin the phrase, but he brought it to my attention when he would talk about free speech for me, but not for thee. So as a young 21-year-old reading the Village Voice for the first time, it was rather intoxicating to understand that there were warriors on behalf of your liberty, your rights, willing to take on enormous powers, whether it be religious powers, educational powers, governmental powers, sometimes all of that are wrapped up into one. And someone who is clearly up to that level is our guest. Jonathan, welcome to the Coalition tonight. How are you?
Great to be with you. How are you?
We are living the dream here in Rhode Island. Yikes. A state in financial collapse, a state philosophically that is, I'll keep it polite. I think the word statist comes to mind. And yet seems to continually double down on failure. But let's talk about positive stuff. First of all, talk if you could give us a little bit more background on yourself. You've been involved in the charter school movement. You've been involved in educational choice. You've also been involved in financing of educational choice. Give us a kind of a smattering of what you've been involved in, and then I want to talk about free speech rights.
Sure. Well, I am a senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, headquartered in Washington, D.C., as well as a senior fellow with the Goldwater Institute. I spent 6 years full-time with Goldwater, which was a terrific experience. I'm grateful for all the kind things you said about Goldwater. We're very proud of the work that we were able to accomplish there. One of the positive things to talk about right away is the momentum, I think, for school choice in Rhode Island. As recently as a couple of weeks ago, I was in Providence just a few weeks ago for National School Choice Week and took part in a couple of speaking engagements and met with teachers and students and private school leaders really from around the Providence area, and we even went to the Capitol one day and had a staff person from the U.S. Department of Education talk to all of the students and families gathered there to celebrate National School Choice Week. So it was a great day. It was a great couple of days to talk about something that I think many families in Rhode Island are excited about seeing more of. And I know there's a small private school scholarship program that's been in operation for almost about a dozen years now, and there's room for growth. So we're excited about the potential for that.
What there's been so little in terms of whether it be scholarships, whether it be an emphasis on affordability for independent schools, and as a result, educational choices, quite frankly, have suffered, particularly given the state of public schools in this nation at this point. What type of focus do you think should take place, particularly say in a state Rhode Island? Is it dual pronged? Is it both on the legislative side, trying to get voucher? What is your preferred delivery method, and how successful have you folks been nationally in encouraging, say, pre-tax contributions to funds so that people can affordably save for a private education or alternative schooling system?
Well, in the states that have had public and private school choice for many years, states like Arizona comes to mind. California has a great many charter schools, as does Florida, for example. Florida has a number of private school options as well. What is key, I think, to the health and the future of private school choice in this country is also going to be a hand-in-hand step with public school choice. I think that Arizona has a long history of what's called open enrollment, where families can choose any public school subject to space in the state. And I think because Arizona had that for so many years, it became an understanding for people that came to Arizona. Now remember, Arizona is a state where people move from all over the country to go there, right? People move from the colder states and places like Canada down to Arizona, right, for the warmer climate. And so people come there and they begin to notice that it's just almost a way of life in Arizona, that parents can choose either from a local school or a school across town or a charter school, right? Public schools of choice. And so when Arizona launched the nation's first education savings accounts, which is the next generation of private school choice, I don't think it came as a shock to people. And I think we know for certain now that families, especially families of children with special needs, really cherish that opportunity. And so education savings accounts, I would say, are the future of private school choice. And I think that the landscape of school choice generally should have, I think, to be healthy, it's got to have a public choice component as well as a private choice component.
Now, in terms of these educational savings accounts, because this is fascinating to me, both of my children attended private school through, let's just say, challenging economic techniques. Hook and crook, I think, was the old term. How do they physically work? So in the state of Arizona, are these pre-tax contributions? Are they post-tax contributions? What's the physical structure of these accounts?
Great question. So education savings accounts are now law in 6 states around the U.S. And not far from where you are in New Hampshire, they may be close to enacting the 7th law here, we hope, before too long. With an education savings account, the state deposits a portion of a child's funding from the state formula in a private account that parents use to buy educational products and services. And what distinguishes the accounts from other private school options is that parents can buy multiple things at one time. So it's not just about private school tuition. It can be also a private tutor, a personal tutor. For children with special needs, it can be educational therapy, things like speech therapy. You can save money from year to year, which is helpful when, you come to realize, right, that the expenses for children, say, in elementary school and middle school are less than they would be once they reach high school. So we've created something something that allows families to customize their child's education, which in the 21st century is very exciting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Children can learn on their iPad at the kitchen table. They can learn in a school setting. They can take classes at a community college, classes online. All of these different things are available to us. So education savings accounts, I think, are really taking advantage of all that technology and innovation have made possible for students across the country today. You know, there are some 4,500 children in Arizona, many of them children with special needs, using education savings accounts. Florida's program, which is only just now entering its fourth year, they have over 10,000 children using the account. So they have grown in the states that have enacted them, and it's very exciting. I mean, it's exciting to think about learning as really designing a unique experience for a student if they choose. You know, some families may just decide on private school tuition, and that's fine as well.
So this is very different, say, from a Coverdell account where individuals
That's
are
right.
making contributions. This is actually a transition and each state, to folks who haven't immersed themselves in this, each state has been challenged to come up with their sometimes own very unique form of educational funding, so that effectively, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because this is one of the most confusing aspects of public policy to mere mortals like myself who have to try and, on our own, very often, despite the best efforts of the state, understand what people's options actually are. So, you know, you've got a state coming up with an educational formula, a funding formula, which allocates a cost to each state. One of the frustrating issues in Rhode Island is that very often when you take your child out of public schools and put them in completely at your own expense at a local private school, I should say private K-12, you're often accused of costing your community money because in government speak, that money ceases to go to your community because you're not part of the population, if you will, in public schools. That's George Carlin would be proud of that concept. A local legislator here pointed out that not only should we be encouraging that behavior, we should be providing limousines to take those kids to their private schools because they're saving the state money, except in the eyes of school boards, right? So how does then, I mean, is a parent able to contribute as well to these accounts, or is this strictly government money in its form of, again, apportioning a part of that allocated cost per student?
So parents can use their own funds to pay for additional services that the account isn't able to cover.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you have a family in Arizona that wants to send their child to a private school as well as hire a personal tutor. And if it turns out that the personal tutor is a little more than what the account was able to cover, families can, they can pay their own money to cover the difference. In order to keep it free from any tax entanglements, you can't actually deposit your own funds into a state education savings account, but the functional way of providing a child's education, that doesn't interfere with it, right? You can still use your own money to pay for things outside of what the account can handle. Your description, though, of public school funding formulas is spot on. They oftentimes read more like a riddle or a puzzle than they do balance sheet. Being able to track a dollar from where it goes from the taxpayer into a school district, and that's one of the great things with education savings accounts. With these accounts, once the money is in a parent's account, the state can track dollar for dollar what they spend their account on, what they spend these funds on, and you can see what purchases are made. In fact, my colleague at the Heritage Foundation, Lindsay Burke, and myself have done studies in Arizona, and then more recently, Lindsay and another gentleman named Jason Bedrick from a group called EdChoice did a study of Florida's accounts, and they did just that. They were able to track where the money went once a family had control of it for their child's education. Doing the same thing certainly on a per student basis from a local district's balance sheets is virtually impossible. I mean, it's being able to follow exactly how dollars are spent and how it matters to a child is extremely difficult. So I think this is another way that these accounts bring us into the 21st century where we can see really what's being done with taxpayer money, and that should be a relief, I think, to policymakers and taxpayers alike.
Now, out here in Rhode Island, of course, we were memorialized forever in the television series Family Guy. So if, say, your child decides to attend Vincent A. Cianci High School, as in Family Guy, is there still, in New Hampshire or in Florida where they've, and I understand there's probably different flavors at work here, but if a child is, the parents choose for that child a conventional approach, a 4-year public high school, for example, is there still money available as part of the educational, that funding program? Or do they essentially, by taking the, and I'm not diminishing this choice, but say they choose the conventional 4-year school, is there money left over, or at that point in time are those funds exhausted? I'm just trying to understand the flow here.
Sure. So if a child chooses an education savings account, they leave the public school system and they are no longer a full-time public school student.
Okay.
They can use their account funds to buy public school services. For example, public schools may have a terrific teacher in math or, say, science, or an after-school program that a family wants to take advantage of, and they can use their child's account to pay for such services. They do need to take their child out of the public school full-time, though, which often, especially in terms of families of children with special needs, is often something that they may be looking for. You know, I think that it is a big step to take a child out of a school where they may have had some degree of comfort, right, or at least familiarity. Mm-hmm. So parents don't, they don't do this on a whim, and so it's a big step. But I think that what motivates families to do this is often because their child was falling through the cracks, or they saw their child falling behind, or their child was being bullied, or something was going on that motivated a family to take that big step. Your question also brings up, so what happens to the students that remain in those traditional schools when other students leave to use education savings accounts? Oftentimes, school districts don't update their funding or update their budgets for a full year after the end of a school year, right? So if a child decides to leave at the end of the year in May or June, it's often the case that the districts don't have to update their funds for sometimes months, sometimes a year. Mm-hmm. In some states, it's even longer than that, which means that the districts have some degree of cushioning for their sake, I guess, to protect them from big swings in student transitions. Now, remember, even before education savings accounts came along, this kind of thing happens all the time, right? Families leave the state, they leave the district, they move to another city, another part of the state. So districts have had to deal with student transitions prior to now. Mm-hmm. This just so happens that this particular student transition means that the student has another opportunity that is a better fit for them and might be a fit for their unique needs. So once the child has gone somewhere else, remember, they're no longer at that public school. So the public school doesn't need to, come up with the resources to teach them anymore because that student's not there. Mm-hmm. Not to mention what I was saying just a moment ago, that, once the child has gone, often there is some delay, right? Some lag before a district has to update its funding. And, speaking in broad terms, because funding formulas are extremely complex, unfairly so, I would say, unfairly complex, so that it's hard for like you're saying, people like you and me to know exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Is there now, for example, in a homeschooling choice, those funds are still available if someone, quote unquote, in the eyes of the state, or as we say on the interwebs, if it pleases the crown, and we apply to homeschool and we meet all those qualifications, are they able to take this money as well?
So the opportunities to homeschool with your own money still exist. They're still there and untouched in the states where education savings accounts have been enacted. So in Arizona, Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi, soon North Carolina, hopefully someday Nevada. Still, there are families today who can choose to homeschool and not use an education savings account and educate with their own money. So homeschoolers, I think, often feel a little concerned that there's something with education savings accounts that may bring the government into their lives somehow. And that's not the case. Now, at the same time, though, another really important feature of education savings accounts is that you don't have to send your child to any school if you don't want to, and you can homeschool them instead. And so that's really a very powerful part of these accounts is that families can say, hey, look, I'm ready to educate my child at home. I want to use an education savings account to do so. And so, they can use the account to buy curriculum, pay for science labs, be part of a homeschool co-op, and those sorts of options. So that really it makes the accounts just such a versatile tool for families with children of all kinds.
And at the same time, it introduces that dreaded competition into the schooling system, doesn't it? Because and this has always been the fear here in Rhode Island, that if you had a sudden flood of people who were allowed to, again, if it pleases the Crown, seek alternatives that work for their children, recognizing in that family structure that the primary goal of education is to help the child, not maintain a bureaucracy and a rather stunted worldview of education. You are essentially firing up the school systems to do a better job, because people will be able to, well, walk, can't they?
And look, the truth is that there are millions of children across the country who have a great spot in their local public school, and they're very happy there, and they're being very successful. And for them, that's great. And no one's going to, these education savings accounts don't take that away from anyone. Mm-hmm. Like we were saying a moment ago with the funding formula, there's nothing about these accounts that is a threat to students who have a great situation in their local school. But at the same time, it's also true that there are students who are not doing well and who are struggling where they are and who do need something outside of an assigned school. And so for that, these accounts really can be a lifesaver. There is research, especially from out of Florida, that has found some years ago that students that use a private school option in Florida, there was a study of children with special needs using a private school scholarship, and it found that the students who stayed behind in the local public school actually saw positive impacts on their education because of those, even though those students had left to use a private school scholarship. So there is research out there. In fact, there are a dozen studies of public schools and what happens to them when private school choice is introduced, and largely they find positive effects for the children that stay behind in those public schools. So we have this great option of private school choice that is not a threat in any way to the students that are a great fit in a traditional setting. And more importantly, for the families that do take advantage of it, it can be a life changer. It can be something that can help turn a child's career around.
What's always fascinated and simultaneously troubled me is that in the current world of education, there are a tremendous amount of resources available, as there should be, for children who are challenged. And it can be any one of a number of challenges. It can be physical challenges, it can be behavioral, it can be the challenges of being dyslexic, of different ways of processing information. There are also, in many school systems, tremendous opportunities now for the truly gifted. I was fortunate enough, for example, where my older daughter was able to, in a non-public school environment, take 4 years of Arabic in high school, and ended up taking Arabic at a Ivy League level, and literally placed out of courses because of the strength she had from high school. What always concerned me is the kids in the middle, the regular kids, the average kids, for whom, you used the word left behind. I'm not going to appropriate your words onto that situation, but I think so many kids who, back in my day, I'm in my 50s, would have been just the mainstream regular kids who often went to a really good college, but they didn't go to the Ivy League, or who went to a really great trade school and have probably actually lived happily ever after. But were bright, articulate, great kids. I believe all kids are great kids. But at the same time, didn't fit so neatly into those two categories, for whom there seems to be almost an obsessive level of funding. So, in respect, my comments on your reflection on those left behind, it would appear that by essentially channeling out, some of these disparate groups, that you would leave behind a stronger school system that would be able to address the mainstream needs of the mainstream children more aggressively. Have you found that to be true, or are you troubled by this situation as well?
Well, the private school choice world is still growing.
Mhm.
And so, what that means is that these options, like education savings accounts, tax credit scholarships, like you have in Rhode Island, amount to about a half a million, a little under a half a million students across the United States. Meanwhile, there are upwards of 45, 50 million children in traditional public schools. So, the number of students using some sort of private school option is so small that it's hard to measure impacts such as that, where you would be able to see across millions of public school kids the impact of having lots of students leave for a education savings account or a private school scholarship. And I think what that tells us for now instead is that these programs grow slowly, and they never before has there been such an exodus out of a public school so that that school has had to close its doors because of an education savings account or a private school scholarship. And that should come as a relief to policymakers, to families that are happy with their local school. When private school choice options, again, when they're introduced, this is another example of how they are not a threat, right? They're not a threat to families that are happy in their school, or to policymakers who, rightfully so, are work very hard, as I know so many do, to support their local public school system. We've never had to close schools by the dozens because of these private school choice options. And so, that should be a reassuring thing to taxpayers and lawmakers alike. At the same time, we have enough students participating in these programs that the studies that I mentioned before, that we have really a library in the academic world of the impact on children using these private school choice options. The outcomes are very good. We have more than a dozen, almost 18, somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 studies right now that have looked at students using private school choice that find positive impacts, whether it's test score gains, graduation rates. There are a few studies now even that have measured college entrance and college persistence that have found positive effects for some students. So, we have enough children using private school choice that we can measure the positive outcomes, but there are not so many that have used it over the years that it has threatened to bankrupt school districts across the country. So, I think it's a very positive thing. I mean, I think it's something that should make people ask, why don't we have more private school choice options, such as education savings accounts and school vouchers and tax credit scholarships? I think we could use to have more of them and still not threaten the bottom line of schools across the country. Because like you said, the per student funding in many places, especially in New England and on the East Coast, from Washington, D.C., New York City, et cetera, I mean, we're talking $25,000+ per child a year. I mean, that's a startling number when you think, you go on the other side of the Mississippi in places like Arizona and Utah and elsewhere where you're at $10,000 or below.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's fascinating. Now, take a quick break, and then I want to get into the subject du jour, which of course is free speech on campus. Folks, you're listening to the Coalition, coalitionradio.us, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Jonathan Butcher is joining us. Of course, he's with a variety of freedom-loving organizations. His expertise ranges, he's kind of a renaissance man of education, but his expertise ranges in everything from school funding, school choice, freedom in education, of course, across to free speech. This hour, of course, is sponsored by Beacon Shipping and Logistics, beaconshippingandlogistics.com, 1-855-3-SHIP-IT. Wonderful organization. I deal with them on a professional level. Imagine, if you will, the efficacy of having a company that ships automobiles and trucks with worldwide reach, based locally right here in Warwick, Rhode Island, as we like to say. They're used by dealers across the nation, whether it be that car that you just bought online, maybe grandma's car that she doesn't need anymore, and you want to give it to your kiddo at university. Maybe you found that perfect hobby car that you want to transport. Maybe you're moving. Maybe you're part of the military. Regardless, beaconshippingandlogistics.com, they support independent media. They've been with us since the show's beginnings support them. Again, whether it be Air Science, whether it be Yacht Club Soda, whether it be Beacon Shipping Logistics, these are folks willing to take the chance to support local indie media because, quite frankly, it's the right thing to do. As a result, they deserve your trust and support. Again, as I mentioned, Jonathan Butcher is joining us via the miracle of Skype. Let's segue into an issue near and dear to my heart. I have a daughter that just graduated from college. I have a daughter in college. Interestingly enough, a young lady at our local art university started a free speech club and met with a variety of reactions. We'll just leave it at that. If you can imagine, at one of the finest art schools in the world, you would think that free speech would be intricately woven with artistic freedom. You might be wrong. There is truly a need in this country for folks to understand that the same underlying components and philosophy that supports artistic freedom, whether it be physical art, whether it be music, you name it, is the same philosophy that's underlying free speech. You can have art that is challenging, insulting, derogatory, and yet I think our culture in this country, by and large, would accept it as artistic expression. I'm not sure that they're willing to give the same blessing, if you will, to speech that they consider egregious. Again, as I mentioned earlier, part of the mission of these organizations is to promote, I'll call it my term, probably not a great one, but plug and play legislation that promotes and supports freedom of speech on college campuses. Where have you found challenges, and what areas are you looking to address right now with respect to free speech?
Free speech on campus is under threat right now across the country. Mm-hmm. It's not isolated to any one place. It's not even isolated to one side of the aisle. I think there are folks on both sides of the ideological divide on campuses around the country that are coming face to face with the issue of not having free expression. I was talking with some students at the University of Minnesota this week who had helped bring conservative speakers to campus, and protesters came out of the woodwork. They found the personal information for these students, put it online. They put their parents' address online. Some of these students, I was talking to a student today at the University of Massachusetts who's had death threats against him because of things that he has written, and he even calls himself not even a far right thinker. I mean, he calls himself even, just right of center, and his ideas, he says, have drawn people to say just awful, in his word, vitriolic things about it. And this is, these are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, right, who are at college to, they should be there to learn and more importantly, have open debate on campus. Mm-hmm. And it's under threat. It's under threat. Yeah, no, it's the outing of people's personal information, using, essentially weaponizing that is particularly troubling to me. The two behaviors that I find most egregious is what we routinely have folks from FIRE on, what we refer to as the heckler's veto. And then combine that again, and the term that the kids use for exposing people's personal information, it escapes me right now, but the very same free speech codes that they seem to abhor in other people, and again, free speech for me, but not for thee, is what's allowing them to behave in this manner in the first place. Where did we go wrong? What happened so that you can have this type of disconnect and just lack of civility, or just bad manners? How did we get to this point? Well, it's certainly not a new phenomenon. If you go back over the past 100 years, especially through the civil rights era, Vietnam, you will see very similar episodes of free speech being challenged on campuses. And fortunately, from the 50s, 60s, and 70s in particular, there are some foundational ideas that came out of places like the University of Chicago, as well as Yale, that showed those schools' commitment to free speech and how to protect it, that we drew on at the Goldwater Institute, along with our friend at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Stanley Kurtz, to help come up with a proposal that state lawmakers can introduce that would, we believe, better protect free speech on campus. And many of these ideas are drawn from the schools that lived this way back, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, in another turbulent time in our nation's history. So, we're fortunate to be able to kind of stand on the shoulders of giants in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Now, so are you looking to legislate this, or are you looking at in terms of at the state level, or are you looking to essentially reinvigorate free speech at the student or at the college level, student behavioral code, for lack of a better term? Where is the emphasis right now?
Well, the most effective way that we have found to work on this issue has been to persuade state lawmakers to think about a comprehensive solution to protecting free speech on public college campuses. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that they would enact legislation. They would have a proposal before them that has a couple of key components to it. The proposal would include requiring the university to aspire to be neutral on public policy issues of the day. This is an idea that traces back to the University of Chicago from decades ago. And it asks the public college to not take positions on controversial issues so that professors and students can speak their mind and can have free expression even on controversial issues and not fear reprisal from university administrators. So that's a first big step. The second, and this is an idea that came from Yale in the 1970s, is that individuals who do violate the free speech rights of others, using, as you mentioned before, the term the heckler's veto, where you shout down a speaker or rush the stage or something like that when someone's giving a lecture, those individuals, if they are twice found guilty of violating the free speech rights of others, they need to face some sort of sanction or consequences for their actions. Mm-hmm. In the case of students, it should include suspension or expulsion. Now remember, schools can already do that. Schools can already suspend or expel students for a variety of things. It could be plagiarism, it could be a variety of different misbehaviors on campus that a school could choose to expel a student for, right? Mm-hmm. All that this proposal, I think that universities should consider, is applying that ability to come down with pretty serious consequences when someone violates the free speech rights of someone else. Now, remember, proposals like these must include key features like the ability to say that anyone lawfully present on a public college campus, especially in their public areas like sidewalks and lawns, should be able to protest or demonstrate there, because that's the end goal, right? The end goal is to allow for peaceful protests and demonstrations so that everyone's voices can be heard, right? And so this proposal makes clear that is paramount to the whole effort. At the same time that we talk about sanctions and consequences for students, we need to make sure that due process protections are included. That's the fancy term for saying that, when someone is accused of something, they need to know what they're accused of, when their hearing is going to be held, be able to find representation for themselves, et cetera. So, we need to make sure that those who are saying that their free speech rights are violated, as well as those who are accused of violating free speech rights, have the protection of due process as well. So those are some of the key features of the proposal that we're talking to policymakers around the country about. Also, there's the issue of free speech zones, which are the backwards named tiny little spots on campuses where oftentimes you only have 1 hour a day or 1 hour a week or something where you can use this tiny little spot on campus to hand out flyers or talk about a controversial issue. Those free speech zones, fortunately, I think we're starting to see they are on their way out around the country.
People are, even at the college level, are starting to understand irony.
Right, that's right.
Now, to me, one of the most difficult areas, because the heckler's veto, I mean, that's so egregious, and it's behavioral, and it's easily manifested, and you get it. It hits you right over the head. To me, the real challenge is the suppression of what's perceived as hate speech. And it's interesting because this past week, or it's about 2 weeks ago, I guess, libertarians were actually the recipient of some hate speech. Professor McLean from Duke University, in a now widely distributed tape, in a public comment. It was originally was giving a presentation and referred to libertarians as being on the scale of autism because of their inability to be empathetic. Now, I'm not sure who that's more insulting to. Quite frankly, if I, as someone who has got a lot of close personal friends who are on the scale per se, in a variety of places, who are clearly capable of empathy, that's insulting to them. It was attempted to be an insult to libertarians and to kind of take a cheap way of kind of mischaracterizing our philosophy, our as being individual in nature, as being somehow uncaring of everyone else because of the primacy of the individual in the libertarian movement. Regardless of all that in the weeds, you've got a university professor eschewing, I don't know, hate's the right word, but clear distaste and clear mischaracterization for a couple of groups of people. Now, if that behavior was perpetrated by, and this is always the claim, if she had made those comments about an ethnic group or religious group, well, Duke University would have gone bat bleep crazy, as we say. I found it interesting because as my role as a pseudo-journalist, I called the Press Information Center at Duke. I called the college president's office at Duke, and I also left a message with the department head for the history department at Duke University. Now, Duke University is arguably one of the, as someone from Furman, you may disagree with this, but Duke University is widely regarded as one of the great colleges on the planet.
Sure.
I guess what's the old saying? If the phone it's not ringing, they're not calling. So none of these people called me back, and they've taken largely a no comment role on all of this. Yet if someone from the much loathed alt-right, or if someone who was libertarian made a caustic remark about, well, fill in the blanks, again, you would have had, in the words of our former President Bush, nuclear. So how long-winded explanation, I'm getting to the point here. What is the Institute's thought on hate speech? Is it simply, as a libertarian, I am firmly in favor of allowing Professor McLean to act like a jerk. And while personally I found it offensive, I'm not going to go into the collective nervous breakdown about it. That's not how it works, though, for the most part. Is there an attempt to address that, how people react to unlikable speech in any of your mission here? Or is that still the third rail? We're still trying to get our arms around that?
Well, one of the truths of the First Amendment is that even speech that we disagree with is often protected.
Exactly.
There is, of course, such a thing as libel. There is such a thing as, saying something that defames someone else's name or threatens their livelihood.
Right.
That may fall into some different categories. But, even speech that is rude and disgusting oftentimes is also protected. Now, here's the thing. We need to create an environment where people can have civil debates and civil discussions, especially on college campuses. It's important because in the young lives of these young people, they need to learn how to talk about difficult subjects, because when they graduate and enter the workforce and join civil society, right, the rest of us here, they need to be able to handle topics that they don't like because they're going to come in contact with it every day. Whether it's taxes they don't like, whether it's people in the office they don't get along with, or whether it's someone at the restaurant that didn't serve them to the degree they thought that they should. It could be any number of things. They need to be able to handle that with a level of civility that really we count on to make sure that society can function from day to day. Right. And so, we want people to have debates on campus. We want people on both sides to be able to express their ideas, but they need to do so in such a way that each side can hear the other. And they need to be able to talk about these important subjects. And it's a critical time when they're in college to be able to learn this, because this is 4 years away from mom and dad, usually for the very first time, for such long stretches, around people who are extremely bright, who are teaching them and running these universities. So this is a pivotal opportunity that colleges need to take advantage of to preserve the idea of free speech and to preserve debate. Like I was saying before, though, some of these horror stories are truly frightening. For a 19 or a 20-year-old to be, by themselves on campus and have mobs of people, in some cases, attack them. I was talking to a gentleman who's a student at Berkeley, and he was there at an event last year when a mob rushed a building and they were throwing live fireworks at him that were exploding. He had to be rushed inside and then rushed upstairs in the building and locked in a room until the police could settle things down, which they, were not able to for a long time. I was talking to some other students again just this week at the University of Minnesota, where they hosted an event where a speaker came to campus, and the mob came from town. It largely was not students from campus. It was often protesters who came from somewhere else. And the folks that put the event on, they had to sneak out the back door. They couldn't even leave the front of the building because the protesters were collected in such a mob there. I mean, this is not normal. This is not right, and this should not be accepted as some sort of new normal, right? We are not protecting students. We're not protecting free speech, and we're certainly not protecting the physical safety of individuals on campus.
Wow. And in the case of the University of Minnesota, without pointing out anyone individually, I'm curious, what was the reaction of the school's administration? Were they horrified? Were they...
So it does not sound like the administration has been as supportive as some would like. I think at the moment the university is in a handling another situation with this right now. Ben Shapiro is going to be speaking there February 26th. And the group that is bringing him to campus tried to get a large room for him because they anticipated, and rightly so, several hundred, if not well over 1,000 people would want to come and see this event. Well, the university situated them at a part of campus that's in St. Paul, which is about 15 minutes outside of campus. So it's not a huge way, long way away, but it's far enough that it's not just right next, just out the dorm door, right? I mean, it's a drive. And it's in a room that is, one student described it to me as a glorified gymnasium. She said that there will be folding chairs on the floor, which is a curious point because one of the safety measures that some of these universities have insisted on is that the chairs be bolted down in whatever room one of these events is being held, so that, as you can imagine, the protesters don't use the chairs as a weapon.
This is not the WWE. This is supposed to be the highest level of academia. I mean, the University of Minnesota is a fine state university, one of the better ones in the nation. With, and yet, ironically, in a state that brought you Hubert Humphrey and Garrison Keillor. Not sure why I just...
It is still a struggle right now between these students and the administration about what's going to happen. So it is an ongoing thing, and that's troubling, right? It's important that universities not disinvite speakers when they're invited to campus, but it's also important that administrators, they need to look at both sides of the students involved in these events. Those students who are putting the event on and sometimes putting their reputations on the line and even their physical safety on the line to do so, as well as the students who disagree. And for the students that disagree, take an example from the University of Notre Dame last year. Protesters came to protest an event where a gentleman named Charles Murray from AEI was speaking. The protesters were able to march outside. They had signs. The media was there and interviewed the protesters, but they did not break up the event. Right. So that's exactly what we want, right? They were able to protest, demonstrate, even get themselves in front of some media, but they didn't shut the speaker down. So that's the kind of example that needs to be created.
And ironically, probably were able to facilitate the dissemination of their own ideas as the opposition.
Sure. That's right.
In a much more profound manner.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
On a personal anecdote, I think it was in 1979 at the university I went to. I was on the speaker committee, and we had then, now think about this for a moment, Phyllis Schlafly, the noted conservative, now recently, She seemed elderly back then. She recently passed, God rest her soul, in a debate over abortion rights versus the then head of the National Organization of Women. All right. Now, in 1979, we're not that far away from the Vietnam War. It was only a few years before that you had the collapse of the embassy in Saigon, and a few years before that, before you had things like Kent State. So, literally we're talking about older brothers and sisters within the same generation. And yet, there was a great deal of tolerance. There was, people were vocally supportive of their side, if you will. But at the same time, the conversation was allowed to go forward. I can't imagine what would happen right now if you brought Phyllis Schlafly, God rest her soul, and had her debate the head of NOW on an issue like reproductive rights. I think the building might explode. Because, I don't know, maybe it's similar. It's just a lighthearted shot here. I've been to a few rock concerts lately, and you're talking to someone who's been to a lot of rock concerts, and kids there, they get mad if you stand up and dance at a rock concert now. So what have we done to our children? But for the university to take that sort of approach, that's disappointing.
Absolutely is. Absolutely is.
I mean, if you're fortunate enough, through hard work and smarts and a lot of hard work, to find yourself at the helm of a major university like that, it's an incredible opportunity and a responsibility to create an environment where the dissemination of ideas, the debate of ideas, can literally change the world.
Mm-hmm.
Or certainly,
That's right.
certainly large parts of it.
And I think these ideas that we're talking about now are beginning to have the intended effect. North Carolina enacted legislation just last year that contained many of the provisions that I was just talking about. The University of Wisconsin Systems, their Board of Regents, their governing board, adopted policies similar to what I was describing just now. There was an event in October of last year where protesters were protesting an event at the University of Wisconsin. And they were asked by media that was there if they intended to break up the lecture because these same student protesters, had done so before. And this was interesting. The student protesters said, no, we're not going to break the event up. And they attributed it to the new policy that the university had adopted, where students who disrupt an event, they could face suspension or expulsion. So they saw that it could be a threat to their educational careers if they use the heckler's veto or if they shouted down this speaker. So, we have these little spots, right? These glimmers of hope. Like I was saying before, free speech zones are hopefully beginning to be weeded out around the country. They're certainly getting lots of negative attention, which is exactly what they deserve. So we are working to turn the tide and using ideas to begin to persuade people at all levels, from parents to students to administrators and policymakers.
So what's remarkable about tonight's conversation, despite the challenges that you and the panoply of organizations that you work with face, some of them are quite dire, quite frankly. The educational system in this country towards the continuation of free speech as a fundamental part of our society, two institutions that are completely under attack, you remain optimistic. You're almost cheery. How do you do that?
Well, we need to be. I mean, we have great ideas. We have solid ideas that preserve liberty, that protect freedom, and that's what we're trying to advance. Whether it's giving children more options in K-12 education, or whether it's protecting free speech on campus, or getting rid of occupational licensing, or giving families more healthcare options, whatever that may be. We have ideas that mean to make people more free, and so we've got to be optimistic. Yeah,
we had Byron Schlomach from the 1889 Institute on just last week to talk about occupational licensing, and it's remarkable when all of you come on. The stories are poignant, funny, tragic, challenging, and all at the same time. So I guess I applaud your organization's ability to maintain a sense of humor. God bless you. Well, again, as always, I want to thank you for coming on. your organization's commitment to free speech and also the dissemination of principles around liberty at the real grassroots to organizations like ours on a hyper local level called the Coalition is affirming in and of itself. Your commitment and your willingness to extend yourself to spending time with us on a Friday night, I can't tell you how grateful we are. And you know, we look forward to the continuing contributions, and we'll do our best here to continue to direct folks to your organization. Again, you know, the theme here, as I said to you before, you've got wonderful websites with incredible diversity of information that's presented in an easily accessible way, so that, you know, regular folks like myself can dive into these issues and be the beneficiaries of all of your work, your writing, your academic efforts is astonishing. So again, thank you so very much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you. Anytime. Happy to do it.
All right, Jonathan Butcher, he is with, well, everything. You know, I'm looking down the list: the Beacon Center of Tennessee, Heritage, Goldwater. You probably talked to Byron in 1889. You guys, you guys
He's a
are
friend.
everywhere.
He's a friend.
And in his uniquely Midwestern laconic way, is able to bring humor to some of the driest yet most important information that we face as libertarians and as liberty folk. It's just all great stuff. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, have a wonderful night. Folks, we're going to take a very quick break. We're going to bring Monique Chartier on from our local think tank. Again, a big thank you to the Goldwater, to Heritage, to 1889, to all of these folks who routinely bring to your home right here in Rhode Island some of the bleeding edge thought in advancing liberty back into our homes, back into states like Rhode Island and across the country. We're going to take a very quick break right now. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, coalitionradio.us. Please like our Facebook page at facebook.com/the Coalition Radio. And of course, please follow us on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_Radio. We'll be right back. And we are back. Listen, joining us for a quick conversation at the end of tonight's show. We missed her. We haven't had her in the studio for quite a few weeks, so we put the special symbol up into the sky. We put the bat symbol up there, and because we needed help. So joining us via phone, via the miracle of Skype phone, is Monique Chartier. She, of course, of every acronym that means anything at this point, too numerous to count. But if there is someone who is in the front lines of communicating all the issues regarding liberty, tax justice, capitalism, equality, and truth, justice, in the American way, it is, of course, my good friend Monique Chartier. Monique, welcome back to the Coalition. How are you tonight?
Thank you so much, Pat. I'm great. It's great to talk to you.
Great.
So I'm going to be curious to watch the rerun, because you said you had somebody from the Worcester paper on to talk about the Paw Sox.
Right, the Worcester Business Journal on, a gentleman who's covers the business beat extensively, Mr. Welker, and
yes.
he was great. We spent an hour and a half talking Worcester, and it was wonderful because we were able to really kind of there seems to be this kind of news bubble between Worcester and Providence. We really, I don't know if as cities we really understand where each other's at, what each other's doing, and I'm not quite sure that the folks behind the Billionaires Baseball Club are too intent on us becoming bosom buddies either. But, well, stinks to be them because we are now. So we officially opened the lines of communication between Worcester and Providence tonight, and my takeaway, which when you get a chance to listen, is that it would appear that the Worcester deal is not exactly the done deal that's being kind of alluded to here down in the not so independent mainstream legacy media.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. That's not what we've been led to believe. We've been led to believe otherwise.
Right, and so and this may be a shock to some. I'm thinking that maybe, just maybe, this might be a stretch. All right, I'll tell you that they want us to believe that the Worcester deal is a done deal, or close to being a done deal, so we'll react out of fear and emotion as opposed to cold-hearted, nattering nabob of negativity logic. You think?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
We
need to grab them before they take off for Worcester and act now, or act now.
Right. So yeah, it's. I won't put words into Mr. Welker's mouth, but we'll have that audio up, and I'll let folks make their own judgment call, particularly wicked smart people like you. So we talked for a minute or two. We've only got a few minutes, but I as always, I'm grateful for the time. You work very hard during the day. You're one of the hardest working people in the Liberty show business. Give us a few reflections, if you will. You wanted to talk about Mr. Dufault.
Yes. Well, so if we turn to Ian Donis's weekly column, TGIF column, we see an item, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. With the General Assembly taking its winter vacation this next week, tentative plans call for Paw Sox officials to sit down with House Speaker Nicholas Mattiello's team later this month to discuss potential changes to the team's Paw Sox stadium proposal. We're looking for some direction from the House, says Paw Sox spokesman Guy Dufault. So a couple of items pop out of that. The first one is that very, very interesting that they're going to be sitting down with Speaker Mattiello, or his team at least.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to keep an eye on that.
All right.
The other thing that I can't help comment on, and I haven't followed this as closely as you have. I don't know if somebody else has pointed this out, but Paw Sox spokesman Guy Dufault. Mm-hmm. So I normally reserve my criticism for government policy and really bad government managerial situations like the disaster that is the Raimondo administration. And I don't normally comment about political strategists, but this is where it starts to intersect with public policy and public dollars. It is amazing and thrilling to me that the Paw Sox have hired Guy Dufault as their spokesperson. He always was a really unconvincing liar and spinner. But then we saw in that disgusting incident the depth to which he would sink to smear somebody, in this case a good Republican governor. And so as somebody who opposes Paw Sox subsidies, I could not be more thrilled that, excuse the word, but political slime like Guy Dufault is representing the request for taxpayer subsidies because he can do nothing but reflect poorly on that request and unfortunately on the Postdocs. And I don't know if anybody else has pointed that out, but that really struck me. When I first saw that they brought him on board, I was like, wow, do you guys really not want a stadium? You're bringing him on board?
Oh man, yeah, it's the go to a hearing in the scene outs, as we say in the coalition, in the halls of justice. Justice is in the halls, and
Yes.
eerily reminiscent of the bar scene in the first Star Wars movie is what the halls of Halitosis Hall look like on a given night of a Postdocs hearing. Yikes! Every coat hanger, strap holder, or whatever.
That's right.
Is showing up to try and get their piece of the pie. It's just terrible. It is. I posted a piece on the Coalition Radio, Facebook.com/the Coalition Facebook page, a piece from an independent website, and I'll share this again tomorrow, that literally covers and gives you, it's sort of a Yelp, if you will, for baseball stadiums. And the one that I like to talk about most is the Gary, Indiana Steel Yard. I've been to Gary, Indiana, and the people there are wonderful.
Yeah.
Very, very challenged community. Quite frankly, they make Pawtucket look like EG. So, and that's, and I, listen, the people that I met there, and I did a brief little bit of business there, were great, and just, salt of the earth. Out here in New England, we call them ham and eggers. It isn't their fault that they've been handled in a pile of poo by the folks who run the city, and so they've got this steel yard, and it's interesting because I presented this during the hearings, and I was poo-pooed, and in the review they talk about the building right next to the stadium, which had been at Bennigan's, which is kind of like a 99s or a TGIF, and that it was empty, and been empty since almost the beginning because of some gunshots and some shootings that had taken place outside of it. And that while, in their words, as of 2016, there had never been the level of economic development expected or promised by it. Well, it was a nice place, and the Railroaders, or whatever the baseball team is called, need our support, because the last thing Gary, Indiana needs is yet another fiasco. So 10, 15 years into it, and there's still no economic development, because guess what? There never really is there?
Oh, my God.
So,
wow.
And so while the Pawsoxanistas would have you believe that every city is going to be just like Durham, confusing the chicken and egg order, that the fact that Durham, North Carolina, was already a vibrant economy, and quite frankly, if you put most entertainment functions in a vibrant economy, that magically it'll do well. They would choose to ignore examples like like Gary, Indiana, or the incredible economic development that's already taken place in a ballpark in a city called Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Yikes! So
Indeed.
The stupidity, the arrogance, the greed, the avarice, really has no bounds, does it?
No, it does. It does not. And it just isn't. There is just no evidence whatsoever that this would be good for Rhode Islanders to get involved with whatsoever. We want them to stay, but there should be no taxpayer involvement.
Right, and here we are. We're going to probably have to gin up the machine one more time to remind Speaker Mattiello, who in good faith has pointed out, to his credit, that Rhode Islanders overwhelmingly don't want it, and he can't support something Rhode Islanders don't want so overwhelmingly. We as Rhode Islanders need to remind the Speaker that not to listen to the clarion call, the siren song, if you will,
Yes.
of the Medusa that is in fact your billionaire baseball boys club. You just can't. We have to stay strong. Now this budget is just plain old nuts too, isn't it?
It's what?
This budget that Jeter is trying to promote. This is just plain old nuts too, isn't it? I mean, is.
Oh my God! It's so bad. And she's continued this practice of scooping, which is taking money out of various agencies and various public budgets so if the question becomes if that money is not needed by that agency, why are we collecting money, or has she simply turned them into a front for the general revenue fund? I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's bad on every front. It's nothing good nothing good for Rhode Island in her budget.
Listen, how is she going to get the money to hire Providence Journal reporters if she doesn't have some type of organized crime going on? These Projo reporters, they expect some coin, man.
What was I thinking? No, you're absolutely right.
I mean, listen,
goodness.
listen, again, as I like to say, who knew that the Providence Journal was an internship program for Rhode Island state government? I mean, they only made the 50, 60 grand a year. Now, they graduated to the big time, and it's a coincidence. A pure coincidence.
Oh my God! I mean,
that the reporter
I mean, we're laughing on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's bad. We need a good, strong media, and she's basically co-opting them, or large chunks of them, by simply taking them on board. It's really a bad development at taxpayer expense, may we add?
Right. She is essentially building her own organization. She's got her first candidate. And running for Senate, I guess, is it Mr. Jabbour that she's running a candidate against in the Democratic primary, who is a veteran, if you will, a refugee, better term, no, that's actually not nice because I like refugees, a cast-off, the detritus, proper pronunciation, of your Economic Development Corporation. By the way, we've enacted a new policy here in the coalition. We will no longer call it the Commerce Corporation. It is and always will be your Rhode Island Economic Development Corporation, your EDC.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. And we will refer to it as such in press releases. But she's clearly, since she can't get her way in the legislature up at Halitosis Hall, she's clearly hell-bent on getting elected. And by the way, that's, folks are wondering why all the money? Why does she need that much money? I mean, she's got an overwhelming amount of money. Look for it to be spent on local races for people who support her agenda.
Oh, that's what's going to happen. Oh,
yeah.
My God.
Because as we all know, an extra couple of grand here and there can make a real difference in a local GA race or House Senate race. It
certainly does.
It certainly does. An extra 1,000 here, an extra 1,000 there, and the Raimondo crime family continues to. Would that get me? Would I have to resign from the Providence Democratic Commission for alleging that? I'm sorry. I resign from the Providence Democratic Committee because I just made a caustic remark about Governor Raimondo. I officially resign. But that's it's. Yeah, what was it, John DePietro, growing up Raimondo? No, I'm sorry. Anyway, so sue me. No, that's the end game as far as I'm concerned. She is going to help get elected, which is why you see these nefarious schemes with said Providence City Committee. She's going to get her people into office, or people either directly from her camp or people sympathetic to her rather twisted, malevolent, amoral, evil agenda. There you have it.
Wow.
I mean, how else can you justify getting, $29-30 million from sports gambling that's actually federally illegal?
No, it's not. Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, like this just completely non-existent money makes it into her budget. Like, how is that remotely responsible?
Well, and let's, Kate Nagel here at Go Local Prov on the mothership, who's a fabulous reporter. She's wicked smart too. Pointed out something to me that I, in the days that I perpetually inhabit, hadn't thought of. I heard, $39 million? Okay. Well, that's $39 million in profit from sports betting. Which means in order to generate that kind of profit, you have to run a sports book, I guess, somewhere in the neighborhood of, $500 to $800 million a year? I don't know.
Oh, God, you're kidding.
I've never been.
Oh, God.
One of the few jobs I haven't had is being a bookie, although it sounds attractive now. So if you need any action on the NCAAs, come see me. But that's the state proceeds from sports betting. That's not the actual volume of sports betting.
Right.
You've
Oh
got to
my
generate
God.
a huge book of business to make that kind of profit. So where the
That's why,
hell where the hell is that going to come from?
it's just not feasible. No, that's not feasible. Even more unrealistic.
Absolutely. So it's there's simply no there there. So okay, so they're off this week, thank God. What we have a 1 week. Who's it a bigger break for, them or us? But I need to get you in studio again soon. So can you think you can make it out one of the next couple of Fridays?
We'll work on that. We'll work on that.
Nothing like putting you on the spot live on the air. But so and I know that you're involved with a couple of organizations. I mean, the final thought, of course, is for this week. We've gone way over as usual, but we've got a minute or two. Is that the toll booths now are in motion. We had Mr. Collins on last week for the first time. It was great. It's funny that you get.
Excellent.
Yeah, we get. Him and I have the kind of same bedside manner. I'll just leave it that way. So after a while, after about 10 minutes into the conversation, it was clear that we were going to get along just fine. It was kind of a question of who has the most contempt for the Raimondo administration. It was kind of a can you top this after a while. I think he may have actually won, which is that's pretty
Whoa.
good. His unique brand of just sheer distaste. The contempt, I think, would be the proper word for the powers that be. It was just front and center.
Now the communications person part of me has to ask: is that available on YouTube or someplace for people to view?
It will be in the next day or two.
Great.
Wonderful. My radio dream now is to get Mike Riley, Mr. Collins, and me in the same room. At which point you could actually see spontaneous combustion.
Yes, indeed.
So, because Mike Riley is one. He's great. So I don't know if the world is ready for that kind of cynicism in one spot, but we'll try.
No, I mean honestly, all the honesty and frankness that comes from all three of you, which is so refreshing. We so need you guys to be speaking the truth. I mean, it's so necessary.
All right, so the tolls are going up. There's no public comment yet from ATA as to when they'll actually engage the lawsuit. The twisted evil part of me wants the state to spend millions of dollars and then get it shot down, and then we can have the torches up. The citizens with torches going up Smith Hill. But
Yeah. So yeah, we have 2 toll gantries that are in place. They're going to spend the next month testing them, and then trucks will go through them, and then we're going to hold our breath to see whether the truckers sue right away or if they wait down the road for the whole thing to go up, as you said. My hope is that as soon as they sue, there's I forgot the word, an injunction, I guess, and they have to stop collecting the tolls, and the whole thing gets tied up in court for years on end, and the whole thing comes to a screeching halt. That would be terrific. That would be the ideal intermediate development, and then after that, of course, hopefully they would rescind tolls, which are not necessary to repair roads and bridges. So yes, the first 2 gantries went up this week. We will see what happens.
All right, and in the meantime, we do whatever we can to facilitate Ms. Raimondo's orderly departure from the political scene, and then we all live happily ever after. All right.
Exactly.
Because that's ultimately the only cure, I think, in the interim, is to find some way to dethrone, as my good friend Johnny Pietro would say, Queen Raimondo. Well, listen. Thanks again for joining us on the fly like this. I love our conversations. If you can make it in the next couple of weeks, the door's open. We will continue to put the bat symbol up in the sky so that we know Super Monique will actually come down from on high and bring to us her unique perspective as someone is clearly the Queen of Liberty and the Queen of all acronyms important in this state. Because at this point, there's about 30 of them, and I can't even keep track anymore. All right.
Thank you so much. It's always great talking with you, Pat.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right, so we've got about 15 minutes overtime. All this stuff, we're working on faster ways to get this up to the web. But I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen tonight, either now or in the future. As always, we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media headquarters at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center. Please like our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. Please follow us at Coalition_Radio on the Mighty Mighty Twitter, at Pawtucket is Home on the Mighty Mighty Twitter, PO Taxpayer on the Mighty Mighty Twitter. Take a moment and follow us so that we can engage with all of you and continue to fight the good fight. This show and other shows will reside in perpetuity on the YouTube page, which is easily linked from coalitionradio.us. Folks, the one common denominator by all the people who joined us tonight is that they, as you should, clearly take this very, very personally. Let's get back right at it, and we'll see you next Saturday. Friday? Whatever. We'll see you soon. Hey, one quick thing. Tomorrow night on the Big 663, Big 68, excuse me, it's late. I'll be on WRKO 680 at 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, filling in for a good friend of mine in his Liberty presentation. Also, please, Lively Experiment. Go up, do a search on Lively Experiment. Must watch television. Jim Hummel's Lively Experiment every week. I have the great fortune of being asked again to join them for the taping next Thursday, for the show on Friday, and available then on YouTube. But folks, if there is must-watch TV here in Rhode Island, it is clearly the Lively Experiment. Anyway, we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.